Chapter 121, Like Falling into an Ice Cellar, Part 8. Nethan held the comm unit to his ear as the Lieutenant General's voice crackled through the bug. Then, just for a heartbeat, a hesitation. No explanation followed. Instead, the voice snapped. Are you questioning a direct order from a Lieutenant General? Withdraw immediately. If word ever gets out that Ghost Hand Rhodes defeated 3 of our Lieutenant Generals, morale across the fleet will collapse. Under no circumstances may you broadcast John's position. Nethan froze, the device trembling in his grasp. Beside him, John's eyes widened in confusion. Pulling back now would hand Ghost Hand's pirates exactly the breathing room they needed, and their shadowy flagship, rumored to be among the fastest in the seas, was already within sight. Evacuating would surely let them slip away. A tense silence fell over the group. Finally, one of the majors, white-faced but resolute, bowed his head and spoke into his own comm unit. Understood, sir. We're executing the withdrawal. Good. The Lieutenant General's voice blazed. Move out at once. Then the line went dead. Nethan stared at the silent speaker, his heart pounding. He still didn't know why they were ordered to retreat, but he understood the gravity of disobeying. Clenching his jaw, he turned to John and the other officers. All right, he said, voice steady despite the chaos swirling in his mind. Form up for withdrawal. Let's get everyone back safely, no matter what. With that, the men fell into motion, their disciplined ranks reforming even as relief, frustration, and apprehension warred in Nethan's chest. He allowed himself only one thought as they pulled back into the mist. This wasn't over. Not by a long shot. Nethan and Robin locked eyes, each unwilling to back down. With a grunt, Nethan braced himself, muscles coiling, and surged forward. I'll finish this before he even knows what hit him, he thought. In an instant, he unleashed his full power, intending to knock Robin out cold and end the fight in seconds. Robin's eyes narrowed. He crossed his arms in front of his chest, and the sand around him churned to life. Dozens of ethereal arms burst forth, coalescing into a titanic palm that smashed toward Nethan. Boom! The massive hand slowed him for only a heartbeat. Nethan drove through it like a hurricane, tearing the phantom palm to shreds as though it were nothing but petals. He barreled on, utterly unstoppable, straight at Robin. Not far away, Luojan was in dire straits. His demon sword had been wrenched halfway from its sheath. He summoned what little energy he had left, hoping to aid Robin, but his strength gave out. With a strangled, ghostly cry, he staggered and collapsed to one knee, barely catching himself before he hit the ground. Running out of steam? Nethan called over his shoulder, his voice cool and confident as the distance between him and Robin closed to a few steps. Nethan staggered under the sudden impact, every muscle burning as he struggled to lift his head. Across the clearing, Robin stood her ground, but before John could press his advantage, a red-tipped cane shot in from the side. Lafayette ghosted in beside Robin, swinging the staff with a sharp crack that forced John to halt mid-stride. Careful now, Lafayette chided, jaw set. Harm Miss Robin, and Captain won't be pleased. John's lips curled into a sneer. You talk of a captain? By now, he's already been hauled back to the warship, he thought to himself. With that, he shook his head, ready to turn away. His cronies, cowed by Lafayette's sudden appearance, had clearly lost their nerve. They would not turn on the famed privateer, and not men enough remained to both hold off Lafayette and seize the Devil's Son. Just as relief began to wash over John, he sensed a shift in the air. Robin lowered her hand, and Lafayette withdrew his cane. A faint, knowing curve played at the corners of their mouths. They were watching something behind him. Confusion creased John's brow. He spun to look, and so, it seemed, did everyone else. About 10 paces back, Luo knelt in half-sitting guard position, breath escaping in a steady whisper. Beyond him, Siru hefted her massive axe, her grin stretched wide under the gathering gloom. An eerie silence fell. Every eye in the clearing turned to that silent tableau. John froze, heart thudding. Whatever was coming next, they would not face it alone. John turned his head bit by bit, following Robin's gaze. About 100 meters down the beach, someone was walking slowly toward them. As the figure came into focus, John's eyes went wide. Impossible, he whispered, a cold shiver racing down his spine. He wasn't the only one stunned. His 2 fellow generals and every Marine in formation stared in disbelief. The man approaching them, his clothes stained with blood, his posture weary, was unmistakable. It was exactly the person they'd been sent to capture. Ghost Hand Rhodes, the man known in whispers as Nethan. How could this be? Hadn't the lieutenant generals sealed off every exit? Had he broken through their lines and slipped away? John's face drained of color. The other two generals exchanged grim looks, suddenly recalling the baffling order they'd received to pull back. If Rhodes had truly punched his way out of the encirclement, the lieutenant generals would surely have been in pursuit, warning everyone to watch for him and to stop him at all costs. So why hadn't they? And what did his sudden reappearance here mean for the entire mission? Chapter 8. Forced Retreat. Fall back to the ships. Those weren't the usual cautious orders to advance and hold the line. When Nethan appeared on the beach, not to attack but to command an all-out retreat, every officer froze. 3 senior generals dared not question it. A chill ran from their hearts down to their very souls. All around them, hard-working sailors felt their courage drain away. Nethan strode forward at an unhurried pace, his calm bearing crushing morale with every step. Whispers spread like wildfire. If he's retreating, it must mean the situation is far worse than any of them realized. Retreat! Get back to the landing ships! No one could say who screamed first. The shout rallied the stunned ranks, and in an instant dozens of sailors scrambled for the flank. John's heart thundered. He gathered himself and sprinted toward safety. But the sandbank ahead of him heaved like a living wall of water. A rolling surge of sand crashed into John's legs. His forward momentum collapsed. He skidded, struggled, then tumbled into the swirling grains. Panic seized him, but with sheer will he clawed free, pushing himself upward with a sudden, violent burst of speed. He vaulted nearly 20 feet into the air in a single moon-step leap. Air whistled past his ears. John slammed his heels against the roar of retreating troops, seeking fresh ground. He half-turned to see if any comrades were safe behind him. Then he saw him. Nethan hovered, silently, effortlessly, just above ground. His cloak fluttered in the sea breeze, his eyes cold and unblinking. John's stomach dropped. Even in flight, he could not escape that silent, inevitable confrontation. Below Nethan's steady gaze, John's limbs went slack. He realized with a sickening jolt that this retreat was no mere fallback. It was an admission that they could not hope to stand against Nethan's power. And now, John himself was trapped under the watchful eyes of the man who'd turned a rout into a retreat, and would decide who lived to board the ships, and who would be left behind. John's heart lurched as if struck by lightning. His whole body stiffened, his scalp tingled, and he nearly toppled from midair. Panic roared in his mind. He spun on his heel and performed a moon step, desperately trying to put distance between himself and Nethan. But before he could clear the next beat, Nethan's fist was already crashing down. "Iron armor," John bellowed, slamming the Navy's 6th Order Iron Nuggets protocol into overdrive. Metallic plates on his arms gleamed as his hastily mastered armaments flared to life. He raised his braced forearms, hoping to fend off the incoming blow. Boom! Nethan's fist smashed through John's defense like a piston. The sheer force shattered John's reinforced gauntlets in an instant and drove the wind from his lungs. His back arched, and he was hurled tumbling through the air. Out of all the headquarters commanders, not even Flying Squirrel and the other lieutenant generals dared face Nethan's twisted punch head-on. They were invariably knocked back with a single hit. What chance, then, did a major general like John have? Chapter 122, The Road Ahead, Part 9. Boom! John's body hurtled down from the sky, trailing blood, and crashed onto the beach with an earth-shaking thud. Sand and gravel exploded outward as a jagged, human-shaped crater opened beneath him. 2 of the headquarters major generals, watching from a distance, froze in horror. They had dared to come to John's aid, only to see him undone in a single, devastating blow. Even the lieutenant generals here were no strangers to fierce combat. Yet Nethan's ghost hand had dispatched John, who'd once been nothing more than a minor West Sea pirate 2 years ago. Without so much as glancing at the 2 fleeing generals, Nethan slipped his hands behind his back and strolled back toward the shore, where the ship's boats lay beached. From the pit behind him came a faint rustling, proof that the fight wasn't yet over. Nethan's voice rang out, cool and steady. "It's your turn now, Lafitte. At once, Captain." Lafitte tipped the brim of his hat, bowed respectfully to Nathan, then clicked his cane on the sand as he advanced toward the smoldering crater. Nathan's hands were bound behind him as he stepped aboard the Ghost Shadow under the crew's watchful eyes. In a heartbeat, he vanished from view. On deck, Robin, her hair tousled, let out a relieved sigh and a small, triumphant smile. Nearby, Luo slumped against the rail, exhaling heavily as he fought to catch his breath. Inside the cabin, Nathan staggered, nearly toppling before slamming a hand against the bulkhead to steady himself. He'd poured almost every ounce of his strength into subduing Lafitte. If he hadn't, there was no way he could have handed him off afterward. Thank goodness nobody had witnessed his weakness. After 2 more ragged breaths, Nathan made his way to his quarters, threw open the hatch, and collapsed onto the bunk. The instant his body hit the mattress, a familiar chime sounded in his ears. Naval Headquarters Fleet defeated. Reward granted, 50 talent proficiency points. A wry smirk curved Nathan's lips. Of course, the system never let him off easy. Even though Nathan had bested 3 lieutenant generals in that single engagement, the system still treated them as one wave and awarded him only the points for a single lieutenant general. What made it worse was that he'd already claimed that reward once before. So, after the standard halving, he was left with just 50 points. Well, 50 points wasn't nothing. Nathan reminded himself that it could have been worse. If the system decided this operation didn't count as a naval defeat, he might have walked away empty-handed. Last time, after annihilating that pirate squadron, he'd earned only 40 points. So 50 felt generous by comparison. With that settled, Nathan summoned his talent interface. After a moment's thought, he funneled 10 proficiency points into the toughness attribute. A warm, golden glow rippled across the interface, and he watched as the general panel statistics shifted ever so slightly to reflect his new, hard-earned resilience. Agility enhancement, 200-500, mastered. Physical enhancement, 350-500. Toughness, 5200, intermediate. Originally, Nathan had only invested 40 proficiency points in his tenacity talent. With 10 more points just added, he shattered the intermediate threshold, instantly boosting both his raw strength and resilience. In the current talent hierarchy, physical and agility enhancements peak at 500 points, while attributes like toughness or armed dominance top out at only 200. Only the legendary Twisted Fruit talent stands above them all, demanding a full 1,000 points to master. Now that tenacity had reached the intermediate tier, Nathan felt an unexpected lightness in his frame. A gentle warmth flowed through his veins, and as he lay there on the ground, the numbness in his arms and legs began to fade. He had pushed his talents to their limit, and the surge of power that followed realigned every fiber of his being. Nathan felt the lingering side effects of his new ability finally beginning to fade. He can't help but wonder, once his tenacity talent was maxed out, would he be able to assume an undead form like Kaido's? Simply filling the toughness attribute wasn't enough. He'd also have to boost his stamina and raise his fundamental physique if he ever hoped to rival a beast as powerful as Kaido. He studied the glowing talent interface again. After a moment's thought, Nathan decided to invest all 40 of his remaining proficiency points into the distortion fruit skill. With tenacity on his side, he knew he could safely handle the strain of overloading that power, and a 40-point infusion should give him a noticeable edge. "Let's see how far this takes me," he muttered to himself. Then he confirmed the allocation. A pulse of golden light flared around him. When it faded, the distortion fruit proficiency had climbed to 445 points. Nathan flexed his muscles, feeling the new surge of power, and resolved to train even harder to bridge the gap between himself and the legendary Kaido. Nathan lay on his back, staring up at the ceiling. The newly upgraded distortion power inside him, if unleashed at full throttle, would far exceed what his body could endure without injury. Fortunately, his innate resilience meant that as long as the overload wasn't too extreme, he could survive the explosive feedback and slowly recover afterward. But there was no time to rest. After toppling the High Command's Lieutenant Admiral, his next inevitable opponent would be a Fleet Admiral, the Navy's supreme rank. Even though he already outclassed a senior Lieutenant Admiral, the gap between him and a full Admiral remained vast. He'd need at least 200 or 300 more talent proficiency points before he could face one with any confidence. Until then, crossing swords with an admiral would be suicidal. His ship would be torn to shreds the moment the battle began. There could be no respite, no enjoyment, just the relentless pressure of sprinting down a path with a lion on your heels, knowing that if you ever stopped, you'd be torn apart. Nathan was acutely aware of the danger he'd chosen, and he refused to falter. Nathan had never wavered on the path forced upon him. He was determined to rewrite the future of these seas. No turning back, no halfway measures. Pirates carrying bounties of 100 to 200 million berries were now too common to merit his time. He wouldn't chase them down one by one. Once he reached the New World, they'd be everywhere. Even on the first half of the Grand Line, only those with rewards north of 200 million and the enigmatic Chiwuhai were truly worth hunting. Who knew, though, if Chiwuhai might fall in battle next and see his bounty plummet? A fierce light sparked in Nathan's eyes. His talent system offered no loopholes, no cheating his way to greater skill. His only real advantage was his raw strength, already above the standard hunting threshold. He still yearned for his first takedown of a 200 to 300 million pirate. At his current level, such opponents barely put up a fight. Only the 300+ million bounties in the New World might test him, perhaps even give him the chance to spar a few times with formidable foes. And he would not disappoint the CP9 network that had been feeding him their precious intelligence. Nathan narrowed his eyes and murmured to himself. Having just routed the fleet commanded by the headquarters lieutenant general, he knew that the hardest and deadliest trial still lay ahead. If he could survive this next stretch and muster the strength to slip past the Navy Admiral's blockade, then at last he would have the means and the freedom to rule the seas. Chapter 123, Reactions from All Quarters, Part 10. Navy Headquarters, the very heart of maritime command. Here, lieutenant generals ranked just below admirals, attending the same high-level naval and government conferences that shape strategy across the globe. Among the newest to don that shoulder insignia were Nathan, callsign Flying Squirrel, and 2 fellow officers. Yet their much-anticipated 3-pronged assault had ended in disastrous failure, and even the cruiser Mozambique had been sent to the bottom of the sea. The repercussions shook the entire command. An emergency council was convened in the central war room, where Admirals Akihiko, Kizaru, and Akainu locked themselves away behind sealed doors. No official word emerged, but the somber faces of the admirals and their aides, caught by sentries lingering outside, betrayed the gravity of their deliberations. From veteran officers down to the newest recruits, murmurs spread like wildfire. This setback was more than a tactical loss. It threatened to unravel the Navy's influence, and even with the government's full backing, its aftershocks might prove impossible to contain. A few days after the battle, news coup-birds carried word of the Ghost Hand pirates' exploits around the globe. In response, the world government updated their wanted posters with staggering new bounties. Nico Robin, the child of the devil, 85 million berries. Lafitte, the devil sheriff, 150 million berries. Trafalgaro, the surgeon of death, 30 million berries. Sulu, the giant axe, 64 million berries. Excluding Nathan, the combined total for those 4 officers already reached 329 million berries, an amount few supernovas in the first half of the Grand Line, even together with their captains, could rival. But the true shock came with their leader's price. Ghost Hand Rhodes's bounty had skyrocketed to an unprecedented 440 million berries. A sum of that magnitude would mark him as a legendary power even in the New World, and yet Rhodes had never set foot there. The bounty has topped 400 million berries. When the world's greatest powers learned of the new figure, they didn't gasp in disbelief so much as fall into a stunned, speechless hush. If neither the world government nor the Navy can bring this crew to heel, then once they slip into the New World, they could very well upset the balance among the 4 emperors. It's a conclusion nearly every pirate and power broker has reached. Even now, the Ghost Hand pirates haven't shown the full force of an emperor's fleet, far from it. Yet their latent potential, their capacity to grow, has become nothing short of terrifying. Dressrosa, In the secluded rear garden of the palace, warm sunlight danced over the pool's rippling surface. Don Quixote do Flamingo lounged in a wrought iron chair, one leg draped casually over the other, a freshly printed newspaper clutched in his hand. After skimming the headlines, he tore out a wanted poster and glared at it beneath his dark sunglasses. A vein throbbed at his temple. "Death Surgeon. Luo?" he muttered. "That brat actually signed on with the Ghost Hand Pirates?" "Lord Doflamingo." Torapol slithered up beside him, his slimy gait reminiscent of a slug. He swallowed nervously, brow furrowed. "Now that Luo's aboard their flagship, what are we?" Doflamingo folded the poster with a quiet snap. "Find out everything we can about this Death Surgeon," he said coolly, "and make sure the government and Navy are watching his every move. Soon as he makes or breaks the New World, we'll know exactly whose side fate's on." Nethin had long understood the reputation of the so-called supernovas, those rookie pirates whose bounties climbed into the hundreds of millions, like the infamous Ghost Hand Pirates. Yet even when their captain, Ghost Hand Rhodes, broke the 300 million berry mark, Nethin barely raised an eyebrow. He well knew that the Grand Line's first half differed entirely from its second. Only beyond the Red Line, in the fabled New World, where the four emperors ruled and the strongest of the Stro and clashed, could a pirate truly prove his mettle. Then came today's dispatch. The Ghost Hand Pirates had just annihilated a marine fleet commanded by 3 rear admirals, shooting their bounty up to a staggering 440 million berries. For comparison, Doflamingo's bounty had lingered at 340 million before he was named one of the Shichibukai, and though his current bounty exceeds 500 million, the Ghost Hand crew was clearly no adversary to underestimate. Nethin's comrade Doflamingo stood reading the freshly posted reward notice. For a few tense seconds, his brow remained furrowed, then he let out a low, peculiar laugh and flicked the paper aside. His features relaxed into a wry grin. Nethin leaned in, curious. "What's the matter? You look ready to charge headlong into battle," he teased. Doflamingo's chuckle only deepened, as if he were already savoring the coming storm. After the Navy's Lieutenant Admiral fleet was routed, did the other admirals just sit back and watch? Of course not. They'd done nothing, hoping the Marines would snatch up that brat Luo for them. But Don Quixote do Flamingo, once a celestial dragon and now one of the 7 warlords of the sea, had a far better plan. Why risk a deadly showdown with the Ghost Hand Pirates when he could score political points by formally handing over a pirate with a 30 million berry bounty? "Exactly," Trebol said with a sly grin. "We've got the leverage to cut a deal with the Marines. No need to go charging into battle ourselves." Doflamingo lifted his glass of ruby-red wine and swirled it thoughtfully. "Dispatch our intelligence division at once. I want everything they've got on the Ghost Hand Pirates. Their numbers, their hideouts, their schedules. Secure their precise location if you can. Slip the data to Virgo and have him deliver it straight to Navy headquarters." He paused to savor the wine's aroma before adding with a low chuckle, "Perfect. Virgo is the Donkey family's most trusted agent, and right now, he's embedded deep within the Marines. No one will suspect a thing." Chapter 8. Echoes of the Hunt, White Town, Early Dawn. Virgo sat on a rickety stool outside the Silver Harp Inn, the thin morning light glinting off his green trench coat. He unfolded a creased newspaper and scanned the bold headline, "O'Hara survivors spotted, Nico Robin's whereabouts still unknown, Ghost Hand Pirates menace the coastlines." His jaw clenched. Since his earliest enlistment, Virgo had climbed the ranks with relentless precision. Now, as a newly minted Major General, he eyed an even grander prize. If he could unearth reliable intelligence on Nithin, rumored to be behind the fall of his ally Lao Kai, he would deliver it straight to the Navy. That single act would not only cement his personal glory, but also lure the fleet's admiral into a direct confrontation with the Ghost Hand Pirates. 2 victories, 1 stroke. He refolded the paper with care and slipped it into his coat pocket. Today's assignment was clear. Find Nethin, by any means necessary. Outside the town walls, the morning air carried laughter over the shattered stones of an old watchtower. A blond youth, muscular and brimming with confidence, tossed a training murloc high into the air, catching it effortlessly as it fell. He let out a triumphant whoop. Perched atop a broken column, a young girl with chestnut hair applauded. Her eyes sparkled. "Not bad, Kai," she teased, "but next time, aim for the far bank." Kai flashed a grin. "I'm just warming up. Your turn, Lena." They exchanged playful banter as the Murloc splashed back into a shallow pool, droplets catching the dawn light like scattered gems. Their laughter rang out, light, untroubled, an unexpected counterpoint to Virgo's grim resolve back in town. City of Seven Waters, late afternoon. The warship Sable Kraken drifted lazily at anchor, its black sails flapping against the gentle tide. On deck, Qingjiao leaned against the rail, the same newspaper clutched in one hand. He flicked his gaze across the headline and snorted. "The Navy's as worthless as ever," he muttered. "And Garp, my eternal thorn, still eludes me. But this Nethan fellow, since he killed Lao Kai, he's become priority number 2. He dipped a finger in his wine goblet, letting crimson drops stain the page. For months, he'd scoured every dock, every rumor mill, for word of the young Major General's trail. At last, it seemed the chase was tightening. The Ghost Hand pirates would have their revenge, no matter where Nethan tried to hide. A light wind tugged at Qingjiao's coat. He folded the paper decisively. The hunt was on. Nethan watched the charts flicker across the map table in the heart of Seven Waters' capital, only a short sail from the Aoichi Sea and Spring Isle. If he could make landfall on the next island ahead of schedule, he just might catch the Ghost Hand pirates off guard. In the 2 years since they'd last crossed paths, their bounties had swelled to an almost unbelievable 440 million Baileys, an increase so steep it set his teeth on edge. At this rate, they'd soon rival the Carp crew, slipping completely beyond his reach. All he could do now was nurse his grudges and pin every hope on this one last chance to strike. "That wretched upstart, mark my words, I'll offer your blood as tribute to Kai Yi." Chapter 124, The Island of Lawlessness, 11th. The ghost shadow plunged through a savage storm somewhere in the open sea. Towering walls of water rose and fell around her, yet each time a monstrous wave threatened to engulf the deck, an unseen force seemed to pin it back, leaving the ship unshaken. No one could tell how long they'd struggled against the wind and rain before the world suddenly brightened. In an instant, the storm vanished. Above them, the clouds broke apart. Around them, the ocean calmed. Nethan stared in awe as he saw a razor-sharp boundary cut across the water. Behind it, white-capped fury. Ahead, gentle swells under a clear sky. It was a breathtaking, almost impossible sight, but to sailors who'd spent years braving the Great Route's strangest phenomena, it was simply another oddity. Nethan blinked, shook off the momentary wonder, and glanced to starboard. Lafitte stepped forward, raising his long-barreled telescope. He trained it on the distant horizon, then lowered it with a grin. "Land ho," he announced. At the very edge of the tranquil sea, a dark silhouette took shape, jagged cliffs rising from the waves. The long-rumored island of lawlessness lay before them at last. Nethan stood on the deck of the Ghost Shadow with his hands clasped behind his back, watching the dark smudge of land emerging on the horizon. They had just left Spring Island and sailed out of the Aoichi Sea. Now their course pointed toward Lawless Island, a vast, unclaimed land in the chaotic sea. No single power ruled here. Instead, rival factions carved out territories, making it a haven for pirates and a hotbed of illicit trade. Rain slicked the wooden planks beneath Nethan's boots, but his uniform remained bone-dry, as if the downpour parted to avoid him. A cold wind whipped up salt spray that danced along his sleeves before vanishing into the air. He inhaled deeply, tracing the island's outline through sheets of rain, jagged cliffs, hidden coves, and the promise of trouble. "Captain Rhodes," came Robin's measured voice from beside him. He bowed his head in respect before continuing. "Kaku's scouts report that Hawkeye Mihawk, one of the 7 warlords of the sea, landed on Lawless Island 2 days ago." At that name, Nethan's steely composure faltered for just a heartbeat. Lawless Island had been earmarked merely as a staging ground, a neutral harbor to regroup and resupply. Facing a warlord of Mihawk's caliber was far beyond their current orders and more dangerous than anything Nethan had yet encountered at sea. He squared his shoulders, eyes narrowing against the driving rain. "Very well," Rhodes replied, his tone steady. "Prepare the crew. Set a course for the southern inlet. We'll see what waits for us ashore." Nethan offered a curt nod. The storm around them raged on, but the real tempest was brewing within Lawless Island's shadowy heart, and soon they would be right in its path. I see. Nethan nodded, tucking the report away. Even if Mihawk, the world's greatest swordsman, doubled his strength, they wouldn't stand a chance. Still, he couldn't afford to dwell on it. Before long, the ghost shadow coasted up to the so-called Island of Lawlessness and dropped anchor on a deserted shore. Captain Rhodes, Lafitte, and Dr. Robin prepared to go ashore, leaving Luo, Siru, and the rest to guard the ship. "Robin with me," Rhodes said. "Lafitte, you're free to scout the other side." "Aye, Captain," Lafitte replied easily. He vanished into the undergrowth without another word. Rhodes led Robin along a narrow beach path on the opposite side of the island. Working with Robin was never an ordeal. At 8 years old, the young archaeologist already possessed a photographic memory. She documented everything worth knowing about these remote isles, and that record had earned her a bounty topping 20 million berries. True, her talent wasn't quite as instantaneous as the pacifist's devil fruit, granted ability to identify enemies, but she was still miles sharper than Rhodes on his best day. The two moved forward in silence, alert to every rustle of the trees. For Nethan and the rest aboard the Ghost Shadow, every scrap of information they gathered today could mean the difference between victory and walking straight into Mihawk's blade. Nethan barely even remembers the smaller bounties anymore. All he can think of is that first prize, over 100 million credits, and the Supernova contract's down payment. Everything else, he handed straight over to Robin. With her talent, she deserved every last credit. They'd come to this place for a reason. Official maps make no mention of the Island of Lawlessness, even though it lies less than a day's sail from the Navy's grand headquarters on the Red Earth continent. No sane merchant ships approach its shores. Stormy seas circle it like a vice, tearing sails and capsizing frigates. Because of those vicious whirlpools and sudden squalls, the Navy and the government have long since written the whole island off as beyond help or interest. At dawn, Nethan and Robin stepped onto a rickety wooden pier. A thick mist rolled in off the water, stinging their faces with salt. Beyond the pier, the main street stretched out in muted colors, shuttered windows, peeling paint, and walls pocked with old scorch and blood stains. Here and there, dark smears glinted in the weak sunlight, remnants of violence that had soaked into the cobblestones. Robin tugged her fedora down a little farther. "This place is worse than I imagined," she muttered, her voice low enough that only Nethan could hear. He offered her a reassuring nod. "The storms you saw on the way in, those are the island's natural defenses. They ring this place so tightly that even the mightiest waves break before they reach shore. The Navy won't risk a single ship." They walked side by side, and almost immediately the townsfolk noticed them. Heads turned, conversations stopped mid-sentence, and eyes followed Robin wherever she went. Rumors of her, of the hurricane, as some called her, had clearly already spread here. Nethan let the stares roll off his shoulders. He reached out and gently squeezed Robin's arm. "Don't let them intimidate you. We're here for a reason, remember?" Robin lifted her chin, and the fedora's shadow revealed a spark of determination in her eyes. "I haven't forgotten." Together, they pressed on deeper into the heart of the island, ready to uncover its darkest secrets and claim whatever rewards lay waiting in the lawless streets ahead. Nethan walked alongside Robin down the crooked, lantern-lit alleyway. Even beneath the low brim of her hat, pulled down to shadow most of her face, her poise was impossible to conceal. Slim of waist and full of graceful curves, she moved with an effortless confidence that turned more than a few heads in the dim light. This island was a lawless fringe, abandoned even by the Navy and the government. Beyond its crowded market district, beauties like Robin were seldom seen on these ragged lanes. As the pair passed, furtive glances flicked their way from every shadowed doorway. Whispers followed in their wake. Who was this man with her? How dare he stroll so openly, with a woman too, in a place like this? Here, guns and gunpowder ruled the day. Law and order were nothing but distant rumors. Only two types of men would dare such a display. The first, a fighter so formidable he feared nothing. The second, a greenhorn lucky enough to have weathered the ocean and survive on this savage shore. Which one was Nethan? The answer, for those watching, would soon become clear. Nethan and Robin pressed deeper into the alley, drawing more and more watchful eyes. Each pair of eyes glittered with greed and desire, but none dared approach. They all feared a trap. After all, in this world, nothing is more dangerous than a hasty move born of carelessness. They hadn't gone far when three figures slipped from the shadows and began tailing them at a cautious distance. Each carried a firearm, and each wore a predatory grin as they leveled their weapons at Nethan's back. Without a word, all three opened fire in perfect sync. Boom, boom, bo-om. It wasn't cowardice that guided their trigger fingers, but cold calculation. You never show your hand first. Here, human life was the cheapest commodity. Better to kill the unknown threat on sight than risk letting him demonstrate any hidden talents. They intended to end him before he could even react. Yet, when the gunfire finally died away and the smoke drifted off into the night, the three thugs' wide grins froze in place. They stared in disbelief at the bullets they'd just fired. Instead of tearing into Nethan's body, each shot hovered, motionless, in midair. Nethan didn't pause or look back. He kept walking down the narrow, lamplit street, then casually lifted his right hand and snapped his fingers. Snap. In the sudden hush, the suspended bullets whirled and reversed course. They tore back toward their owners with deadly precision. Blood spurted. Screams were swallowed by the night. In seconds, all three men lay silent on the cobblestones, crimson pooling beneath them. Only when their backs disappeared into the deeper darkness of the alley did two pairs of hidden eyes finally dare to breathe. Shadows shifted as onlookers pressed against the wall, hearts pounding. He just made the bullets come back, one whispered, voice trembling. Impossible, the other muttered, dread in his tone. A devil fruit power. Here, of all places. This is a lawless island in the Grand Line, but we're still small-time crooks. Nobody around here can do something like that. They exchanged terrified glances, each now certain that tonight they'd witnessed something far deadlier than any ordinary gunfight. Even though they'd witnessed devil fruit powers countless times, they all knew better than to provoke someone who'd eaten one. Chapter 125, Part 12. It was maddening. As they slipped out of the deserted alley, Robin tugged the brim of her hat down to shade her eyes. Nethan did the same, pressing his leather cap low over his brow to obscure his face. "There's nothing worth our time out here," he muttered. "Let's head for the town center." Robin fell in beside him wordlessly. They wound their way through narrow lanes where every wall was streaked with grime and flecked with dried blood. Gradually, though, the streets opened up and the underfoot changed to neat bluestone slabs. The oppressive gloom lifted, the storefronts grew cleaner, the air less rank. A few early passers-by glanced curiously at the pair, but most averted their eyes and continued on their way. At last they arrived in the island's beating heart, the capital of this so-called land of outlaws. In an instant, the ramshackle border district was forgotten. Here, taverns dripped with gilded trim, and casinos glowed behind arched doorways. Lanterns bobbed above crowds of well-dressed patrons. Noblemen in fine coats escorted courtesans down the boulevard, each party followed by a cadre of sword-toting guards. Laughter, music, and the clink of glasses spilled into the streets, a vivid reminder that in this place, the rule of law was nothing more than a whispered legend. Nethan had no firm lead or target. He'd simply come to the gambling district to see if any valuable prey might cross his path. After a quick survey of the street, he strolled into the nearest casino with Robin at his side. Inside, Nethan casually exchanged 10,000 Bailey chips at the counter and promptly lost them at the tables. Robin kept his gaze low, then gave Nethan a resigned shake of his head. "Let's try another place," Nethan said. He tossed the last of his chips on the roulette wheel and lost again. Undeterred, Nethan and Robin left that casino and made their way to a larger one deeper in the block. This time, Nethan didn't even bother cashing in new chips. He meant only to scan the room, and if nothing worth his time appeared, turn around and walk back out. What he didn't expect was to find a mark the moment he stepped inside. At a richly appointed baccarat table sat a man in a loose lavender kimono. His eyes were closed. A stubby beard framed a simple, unpretentious smile. One hand rested behind his head as if he'd just stretched, yet there was an air of quiet confidence about him. "I've won again," the man said softly, opening his eyes at last. "Sorry about that." Nethan froze. The blind man in purple before him was exactly the kind of mysterious, powerful figure he'd been hunting. A strange glint passed through Nethin's eyes as he met that serene, knowing gaze. Based on the established timeline, 2 years after Luffy set sail, the blind man in purple standing before them will answer the world's draft, and with his monstrous strength, he'll soon be promoted to the rank of admiral at Navy headquarters. His true identity will finally be revealed. Fujitora offers a faint, knowing smile. Nethin had long wondered who he could recruit to shore up his crew's fighting power. Lafitte was dependable, but he lacked the brute force needed for the front lines. Fujitora, by contrast, was the perfect candidate, but the timing simply wasn't right. Despite the blind admiral's unwavering sense of justice and generosity, every spectacular display of his power, from summoning a meteor to intimidate Doflamingo to boldly sparring with Fleet Admiral Akainu over principle, only underscored just how formidable and proud he was. And when it came to a man of such colossal strength, pride was his greatest asset. Nethin realized that no matter how many berries he offered, 100,000 even, his own power was still too meager to convince Fujitora to jump ship. Nethin paused at the casino's front desk, traded his voucher for a stack of chips, and then made his way to the gaming table where Admiral Fujitora sat. He slid into the empty seat beside the blindfolded officer just as Fujitora accepted his winnings from the dealer. Behind him, Robin followed, her eyes narrowing at the admiral. Even at rest, his presence pressed down on her like the weight of a steel fortress, immovable, overwhelming. Though she felt the intensity of his strength, she said nothing. Nethin had already sensed it, too, and no warning was necessary. Seating himself, Nethin exhaled softly, steadying his nerves. He leaned forward, watching the roulette wheel spin, his posture radiating quiet confidence as he tracked the little ivory ball's flight with focused intent. "Place your bets," the croupier called, gesturing to the numbered table as the wheel's pace began to slow. Nethin squared his shoulders, slid a chip forward, and met Fujitora's inscrutable gaze, ready for whatever fortune might bring. Nethin leaned forward, eyes fixed on the spinning wheel. Summoning his courage, he pushed a small stack of chips onto black. Across the table, Fujitora caught his move. He paused, offered Nethin a warm smile, and quietly matched the bet with his own chips on black. The wheel slowed. The silver ball rattled around its track, then settled in a black slot. The croupier swept away the losing white bets, slid Nethin and Fujitora their winnings, and gave the wheel another spin. This time, barely 2 rattles in, Fujitora coolly plucked chips from his pile and placed them on white. Nethin watched in surprise. Before he could decide, the chips were already down. The ball spun its final laps, then clicked into white. Fujitora accepted his payout with a sheepish shrug, scratching the back of his head. "Nothing special," he insisted. "Just a bit of luck." Half an hour had passed, and the table buzzed with excitement. Nethin still marveling at Fujitora's uncanny timing, determined to learn the secret behind his effortless wins. Nethin's stack of chips at the roulette table had climbed to 500,000 Baileys. Beside him, Admiral Fujitora boasted more than 900,000. Each time they placed a modest wager, an army of onlookers, captivated by their unstoppable streak, jumped in to mirror their bets. The dealer wiped his brow in mounting panic. Though Nethin and Fujitora bet small, the deluge of followers was bleeding the house dry. At last, the casino's floor managers snapped. 7 burly attendants stormed the table, cutting off all further bets. "We're closing this table for maintenance," one of them announced, waving away the remaining players. Amid the commotion, Robin, who had been standing quietly behind Nethin, leaned forward. "Who just came down from the upper gallery is Mogu the Ripper," she murmured. "He carries a 71 million Bailey bounty, and he's heading out." Nethin glanced after the grim figure disappearing into the corridor. He turned back to Fujitora and offered a sly smile. "I've got other business to attend to, but before I go, one last bet. If you win, you take my entire stack. What do you say?" Fujitora regarded him calmly, the single visible eye alight with amusement. "All your chips, you say? Very well. State your wager." Fujitora was just gathering his chips when Nethin spoke. He stopped mid-sort, hands hovering over the stack, and looked up in surprise. In that instant, he heard a soft tap on the table. Nethin's fingertip had struck the wood, and with a sudden lurch, the roulette wheel, which casino staff had been servicing nearby, sprang free of its mount. It flew across the felt and clattered to a stop between them. A stunned hush fell over the crowd. What had just happened? Nathan didn't miss a beat. He picked up the little ivory ball, let it roll smoothly off his palm, and dropped it onto the rim of the wheel. Then, with a backward snap of his wrist, he sent the wheel spinning faster than anyone had ever seen. Fujitora stared at the blur of red and black. "Impossible," he murmured. He thought for a moment, then slid every chip forward. All in on white. The wheel hesitated, shuddered, then gradually slowed. The ball careened once, twice, then finally nestled into a white pocket. Fujitora exhaled and shook his head. He pushed his empty tray away. "I lose." Nathan pushed the last of his chips across the green felt toward Admiral Fujitora, then rose from his seat with a quiet, confident smile. "Next time, we'll raise the stakes, and you'd better stick around to see it through." Fujitora returned the smile and nodded, gathering his winnings into neat stacks. The two men stepped away from the table and out of the hushed lamplit casino hall, their footsteps echoing on the marble floor. As they disappeared into the night, each carried the unspoken promise of a rematch yet to come. Chapter 126, First Blood. Nathan's cocky swagger had just collided with Mogu's house edge. He'd wagered hundreds of thousands of Baileys in a single losing streak. Now he stormed out of the casino into the cool night air, jaw clenched. "Damn it, I'm running out of money again," he muttered. Across the street, Mogu, the notorious tierer with 3 unnaturally long arms and a 71 million Bailey bounty, strode along in a battered windbreaker, one arm draped possessively around a stunning blonde at his side. His face was a storm cloud of discontent. Nathan squared his shoulders and marched straight toward him. The blonde tilted her head, golden curls catching the neon glow, and offered a playful smile. "With 71 million Baileys on your head, you could make a fortune just by showing up." Mogu cracked a crooked grin that didn't quite reach his eyes. "Chasing One Piece or begging the world government's navy to notice me. Not my style. I'd rather sail the first half of the Grand Line as a pirate in these backwater lanes where neither navy nor government bothers me." The island had long since thrown off the shackles of law and order. Here, if you ran out of coin, you simply raided someone else's stash and then returned home to squander your loot. Nathan strolled confidently through the crowded street, one arm draped possessively around the slender blonde at his side. She laughed softly at something he said. Then the ground shuddered beneath their feet. Without warning, the earth split open in a jagged fissure right under Nathan's boots. He let out a strangled cry as he tumbled headfirst into the yawning chasm. "Wait!" The blonde froze, her laughter strangled off into a gasp. She lunged forward toward the crack, desperate to catch him, but the crevice snapped shut as suddenly as it had opened. A sick pop echoed through the narrow gap, and a spray of dark blood burst upward, splattering her from head to toe. She stood rooted in shock, crimson dripping from her hair and clothes. "Ah!" The scream tore from her throat before she could even think. In that same instant, the ground beneath her feet fractured, swallowing her whole. Her cry vanished into the newly formed abyss. On the crowded street, people reeled back in terror. A man closest to the scene slid onto his backside and rolled away, eyes wide as he shouted, "My God, it's like hell opened up right here." In the stunned silence that followed, only the dripping of blood and the faint echo of 2 terrified screams remained. Nathan and Robin froze as the earth before them split wide open, as if it had sprouted a massive, gaping maw. In an instant, 2 unlucky passers-by were swallowed whole, their screams cut short. The street emptied in the blink of an eye, every soul fleeing, until only Nathan and Robin remained, standing more than 20 meters away from the chasm. A calm, mechanical voice whispered in Nathan's ear. "Bounty, 71 million berries. Target, Mogu the Ripper. Hunt completed. Talent proficiency increased by 15 points." He pulled back his now vanished hand and gave Robin a curt nod. "Let's go." Moments later, word of Mogu the Ripper's sudden, inexplicable demise raced across the island of Lawless, an island that marked the first half of the Grand Line. In these waters, anyone with a bounty over 100 million berries is a supernova. Those carrying bounties above 70 million are among the world's fiercest pirates. And yet, here lay proof that even the strong can fall without warning. Ordinarily, news of a 71 million berry pirate's death would bring the entire island to a standstill. This time, though, it only stirred a ripple, a brief sensation that was nearly drowned out by something far more extraordinary. Compared to that other commotion, this one sparked an even bigger sensation. On this lawless island, the famed pirate hunter One-Armed Carlos had issued a challenge to the world's greatest swordsman, Hawkeye Mihawk. Since defeating his predecessor and claiming the title, no blade wielder has come close to matching Mihawk's skill. Beneath his feet lie the broken swords and bones of countless challengers. The world acknowledges him without question as the supreme master of the blade, and Carlos himself is no slouch. Among pirates, he ranks with the four emperors. Among pirate hunters, he stands alongside the very top. In the New World, he once dispatched a notorious 550 million belly pirate, earning his fearsome reputation. When word of his duel with Mihawk broke, the entire island buzzed with excitement, so much so that Mogu, the 70 million belly cutthroat, barely registered on anyone's radar. Every eye was fixed on the coming showdown. Ruin Street. This street, once a bustling avenue on the island of lawlessness, now lay in ruins. The outbreak of war had leveled every building, leaving only shattered walls and crumbling masonry. Amid the wreckage sat a lone figure, One-Armed Carlos. His famous crimson blade, the Big Knife 21, Yanyue, rested across his lap, its edge still gleaming in the dull light. Around the perimeter, dozens of onlookers had gathered atop the remaining ledges, their eyes fixed on Carlos. To most of them, a 300 million berry bounty was already a legend. Carlos, with his 550 million berry price tag for hunting pirates, was spoken of in hushed reverence. Even in the New World, he was a force beyond compare. "Will the Hawkeye show?" Someone murmured. Whispers echoed through the crowd. A true master swordsman never shies from a challenge, and everyone here knew the Hawkeye was on this island. Yet he had remained unseen, more myth than man, to all but the most fortunate or unfortunate who claimed to have crossed blades with him. As minutes stretched on, the air grew thick with tension. No one could say how long they had waited, nor what would happen when steel finally met steel. But every breath they drew told them the moment was imminent. At the summit of the ancient ruins, Carlos, his left arm gone, legs folded beneath him, sat in still meditation. Then, without warning, he opened one eye. A flicker of fierce intent sparked in his gaze. Following his line of sight, everyone saw him fixated on a lone figure approaching from below. He was impossibly tall and lean, dressed head to toe in black, a top hat, a long trench coat, and slung across his back, a broad-bladed blade, sheathed in darkness. Whispers died on the wind as onlookers recognized him. Hawkeye Mihawk, the world's greatest swordsman. Even from a distance, the legendary Black Blade was unmistakable. A collective shock rippled through the gathered crowd. They dared not raise their heads at such an imposing presence, but all eyes were drawn skyward by Carlos's unblinking stare. In a quiet corner of the ruins, Nethan stood alone, hands clasped behind his back. His amber eyes danced with a mix of awe and calculation as he watched Mihawk draw nearer. He murmured to himself, voice low enough for only he to hear. How far behind him am I, truly? How strong is Hawkeye Mihawk? Titles and tales only go so far. Even his deadlock against the red-haired pirate merely hints at the depths of his power. He fell silent then, resolve hardening in his chest. Whatever the truth of Mihawk's strength, Nethan knew one thing for certain. Today's arrival would change everything. Robin stood beside Nethan, her eyes fixed on Hawkeye as he advanced with unhurried confidence. The man's presence alone was enough to command respect. Nethan might have defeated the Chiwuhai crocodile, but that beast was nothing like Hai Xia Jinping, a terrifying powerhouse rumored to bridge the gap between humans and murlocs. Neither Hai Xia Jinping nor any other known force could compare to the legend of Hawkeye. Across the seas, Doflamingo's Don Quixote family had splintered into factions all over the globe. Moonlight Moria had even dared to challenge Kaido, the so-called beast, only to see his entire army wiped out, yet somehow Moria himself had survived. In a world ruled by colossal crews and hidden alliances, Hawkeye remained a singular enigma. He belonged to no fleet and answered to no one. Single-handedly, he carved a path of dominance through these waters, earning his title among the 7 warlords of the sea by sheer force of will and unmatched skill. Now, as he closed the distance, Robin and Nethin could only watch, both awestruck by the approach of a man who needed no allies to become a living legend. Chapter 127, Leader Green Pepper, Part 2. A low, amused chuckle rippled through the crowd. Hawkeye Mohawk versus one-armed Carlos. Lafitte had already slipped into the ruins, but rather than approaching Nethin, he stayed at the outskirts, observing in silence. Now, under thousands of eager gazes, Hawkeye Mohawk finally advanced toward Carlos. "You actually showed up," Carlos called, leaping down from the broken stone terrace. He gripped the hilt of the flaming red blade, Yanyue, in his one good hand, and met Hawkeye's steady stare. "I half expected you to back out, given my condition." Hawkeye closed his eyes for a heartbeat, then slid the sleek black blade from behind his back. He opened his eyes again, cool, unblinking, and addressed Carlos in a calm, even tone. "I accept any challenge. Cripple or not, you're famed as one of the greatest swordsmen alive. Defeat my black blade today, and the title of strongest is yours." A slow smile curved Carlos's lips. With sudden speed, he drew Yanyue fully and unleashed a furious slash. A flash of crimson energy tore across the ruined courtyard, gouging fissures into the earth. From each crack sprang roaring red flames, feeding the sword's destructive force. The ground heaved with heat. The legendary Sword of Slaying Flames had awakened. And standing on the edge of the battle, Nethin's heart pounded at the sight of the 2 masters, each ready to test his blade against the others. Hawkeye's face darkened. He swung his black dagger in a wide, furious arc, and a flash of scarlet sword chi struck the blade. The brilliant glow engulfed the dark steel in an instant, shattering it to fragments. For a swordsman, sword chi serves both as a long-range strike and a way to lure opponents in, but true devastation comes only from steel meeting flesh. In the next breath, Hawkeye vanished. Then, as if reappearing by thought alone, he materialized right before Carlos, dagger raised overhead. The blade plunged down in a merciless slash. Carlos barely managed to lift his own sword in time. Metal rang against metal with a thunderous clang. He staggered as his arm buckled under the impact, forcing him to bleed off energy to stay standing. The discarded power blasted into the ancient ruins behind him, ripping a jagged fissure more than 100 meters long through crumbling stone. From his vantage point a short distance away, Nethin watched with narrowed eyes. He exhaled slowly. He couldn't tell if Hawkeye had held back or unleashed everything he had. But one thing was certain. Carlos wouldn't walk away unscathed. Even so, Hawkeye's display still left him leagues behind the world's top fighters. Nethin murmured inwardly, summoning the talent system. He invested the 15 proficiency points he'd just earned from slaying Mogu the Ripper, 5 into his Twisted Fruit ability and 10 into physical enhancement, and felt a surge of power ripple through his limbs. Boom, boom, boom. In the distance, the duel erupted into a white-hot clash of blades. Confrontations among the world's top fighters can stretch on for hours, but sword duels, even between evenly matched masters, are over in the blink of an eye. When the world's greatest swordsman, Hawkeye, faces an opponent like Carlos, victory is virtually assured. By Nethin's reckoning, Carlos's strength might rival a prime Doflamingo or one of the lower-tier disasters under the 4 emperors, but Hawkeye was in a completely different league. If Nethin ever went up against Carlos himself, he could perhaps hold his own, but winning? That would be another story. Moments later, Carlos lay utterly defeated. As the dust settled, every eye shifted from the battlefield to Hawkeye, and a ripple of astonished murmurs swept through the crowd. Nethin and Hawkeye stood facing each other on the training field, steel ringing against steel. At first, Nethin had been able to hold his own, matching Hawkeye move for move, but after what felt like dozens of exchanges, momentum slipped from his grasp. He found himself driven back, cornered, and clearly on the brink of defeat. Still, a true swordsman never surrenders until the final stroke. Gritting his teeth, Nethin rallied his spirit and surged forward. Clang! He landed a precise riposte that forced Hawkeye to pause for just a heartbeat. Shaking off the pressure, Nethin arced backward 4 steps, enough to catch his breath, enough to prepare for one last gambit. If this move fails, I lose, he told himself, sliding his fingers along the hilt. A fierce grin spread across his face as sword intent pricked at his nerves. In that instant, he and his blade became one gleaming edge. Golden sparks flickered to life above the sword's spine, coalescing into a rising halo of fire. Hawkeye didn't budge. He stood perfectly calm, 2 hands firm on the long haft of Haidaoye, ready to parry. Nethan let his breath go and roared the name of his technique, Flame Sword Flow, instant slash. He exploded forward, muscles coiling, eyes aflame. His sword blurred into a streak of molten light, slicing through the air with such speed it carved a shimmering arc across the field. And then, in a single dizzying moment, the 2 fighters seemed to swap places. Nethan froze where Hawkeye had stood, and Hawkeye found himself back at Nethan's starting point. Silence fell. Dust drifted between them. Neither had dropped their sword. The question hung in the air. Was it over? And if so, who had truly won? The spectators held their breath as they watched from a distance. Under countless eyes, Carlos swung his sword one last time, only to feel a sudden crack split his chest from abdomen. A spray of blood shot out, and he staggered before collapsing to one knee. Across the clearing, Hawkeye slowly sheathed his black blade and turned away. The duel was over. Nethan shook his head. He hadn't even needed to see the final moments to know who'd won. He'd come merely to measure himself against the world's best, and now that he'd gauged the gap, he intended to leave. But as he turned to go, a voice echoed through the shattered ruins, shattering the stillness. "At last, I've found you. Ghost Hand! Nethan!" A bald, gray-bearded elder burst through the crumbling walls, each step raining debris around him. He charged into the clearing and skidded to a halt before Nethan. Nethan glanced up, ready for whatever the old man would do next. A sudden ripple of commotion swept through the crowd. All eyes snapped to the giant, bald figure standing at the entrance, and a collective gasp rose from those who recognized him. One onlooker's face went pale as realization dawned. "That can't be Chief Green Pepper!" The name sent a shockwave through the assembled onlookers. Green Pepper had been a pirate legend decades ago, his daring exploits and half-billion-berry bounty seared into the memories of a generation. Although he hadn't sailed these waters in years, his reputation remained larger than life. Before anyone could recover, the old pirate's booming voice tore through the hush. "Rhodes! Ghost Hand Rhodes!" From a few yards away, Hawkeye, lean and unflinching, glanced at Chief Green Pepper, curiosity flickering in his eyes. He offered no greeting, no sign of surprise, then flexed his legs and vaulted away in a single, silent bound. With Hawkeye gone, every gaze settled back on Green Pepper and the man whose name he'd just summoned. Ghost Hand Rhodes wasn't as storied as Hawkeye, but among common folk he was every bit as formidable, a whispered legend in his own right. Even in this ruined hall, the presence of these 2 titans made the air crackle with tension and awe. Nethan surveyed the island quietly from the cliff's edge. In every hidden cove and rocky outcrop, he sensed the presence of powerful figures converging here, and none looked fondly upon him. Beside Rhodes, the mercenary whose reputation for brutality went before him, stood Green Pepper, her gaze cold and unyielding. "Leader Green Pepper," Nethan called out, his voice low and steady, "you've certainly gone to great lengths to find me." He let those words hang in the humid air, meeting her stare without a flicker of doubt. Ever, since Nethan had put an end to Lao Kai, he'd known Green Pepper would come hunting. For weeks he quietly tracked her movements, slipping through shadows to avoid a direct clash. Then, after returning to Qinghai from the deserted island, he grew complacent, more preoccupied with securing supplies than watching his back. Now, with her forces arrayed before him, he admitted nothing of that lapse. Rhodes cracked his knuckles, but Nethan didn't flinch. He had prepared for this moment, and whatever schemes Green Pepper and her allies had laid, he was ready to meet them head-on. Chapter 128, Showdown with the Green Pepper, Part 3. Ha-ha! Even the Vice Admiral's fleet has fallen. They've been growing too fast lately. Kai Yi's affairs are truly all wrapped up. Green Pepper strode up to Nethan without a hint of hesitation. He reached out and tapped the smooth, bald crown of Nethan's head, eyes narrowing as he spoke in a deceptively gentle tone. Nethan met his gaze coolly and said nothing. Instead, he turned to Robin. "Stand back, Robin." Robin inclined his head, all the while sizing up Green Pepper's imposing figure. Every scrap of information he'd gathered about this man, his reputation, his exploits, flashed through his mind. Then, with a light hop, he retreated to the rear. Green Pepper's lips curled into a sneer. He cast a derisive glance at Robin. "So you're the survivor of the O'Hara incident? The one they called the Devil's Son? You've got a lot of nerve, boy." Green Pepper's fame had been forged long before the O'Hara affair. He'd risen to prominence in Carp's generation, at a time when pirates were nothing more than legends. Rumors of O'Hara's destruction had reached his ears years ago, but that felt like ancient history. And here sat Nethin's young lieutenant, daring to stand his ground. Green Pepper turned back to Nithin, his voice leveling into calm authority. "No matter who you are or where you come from, once you set foot on my ship, you're one of my crew." Nethin said nothing, his unreadable expression giving nothing away. Around them, the tension coiled tighter as shipmates watched the brewing duel of wills, the sea itself seeming to hold its breath. Nethin paused to size up Green Pepper's power. In his memory, this old sea lord had once matched Luffy on Dressrosa, only to be brought down later by Rao Ji of the Don Quixote family. That clash with Luffy had been his last great exertion. At that point, his hair and beard were pure white. Now his beard was merely gray, and he'd lost even more since Garp personally shaved his head. Even at his peak, Green Pepper had stood among the strongest in the Chiwuhai. How much of that strength remained? Nithin couldn't say, but the grin curling the pirate's lips suggested confidence. A low, menacing chuckle escaped Green Pepper. His gray-white beard, once drooping to his chest, suddenly seemed to come alive, lifting into the air in an eerie, weightless dance. His narrow eyes snapped open, and a suffocating aura radiated from his form, swirling like storm clouds. His glare fixed on Nethin, and his voice dropped to an icy snarl, bristling with murderous intent. "Kai was my greatest disciple. Your blade ended him. As the pillar of the 8 Treasures Marine Corps, I watched him suffer unspeakable agony. Now, Nithin, it's your turn to feel true pain." Nithin barely had time to register his opponent's movement before Green Pepper's massive arm snapped into a fist, black, oppressive energy crackling around his forearm. With a thunderous whoosh, that armored fist barreled straight at him, and a domineering aura, an overlord's presence, erupted from Green Pepper's body in all directions. Boom! Unfazed, Nithin tightened his jaw, raised his right hand, and slammed his own fist into Green Pepper's. The two wildly mismatched blows met in midair, unleashing a shockwave that ripped through the street. Asphalt fractured in spiderweb patterns, spraying debris across the ruined road. Could this really be Overlord-tier power? Nethin felt the pulse of that energy, so reminiscent of the knowledge-armed stage yet utterly different, and his eyes flashed with recognition. Even as the echo of the collision rattled the air, he didn't flinch. The pavement beneath his boots cracked. So did the ground under Green Pepper, who held his stance with unshakable confidence. Neither fighter yielded. Dust and grit filled the space between them as they stared each other down, fists still locked in their deadly embrace. The street around them lay in ruin, testament to this explosive confrontation, and both men knew they were only getting started. Those watching from a distance, ants all collapsed to the ground, stunned by the oppressive aura radiating from Qingjiao, the Green Pepper overlord. His presence, though undeniably commanding, wasn't so overwhelming that every onlooker was felled. Several remained on their feet, drenched in cold sweat and eyes wide with terror. "What's going on? Why have you all fallen?" someone cried, panic edging his voice. A few more sank to their knees, frothing at the mouth before slipping into unconsciousness. Fear of the unknown gripped them, their faces pale and drawn. It was the very definition of tyranny, an arrogance only an overlord could exude. One veteran observer, voice hushed yet awestruck, offered an explanation. "No wonder they're terrified. Leader Qingjiao once carried a bounty north of 580 million Baileys, 580 million. At his peak, he could go toe-to-toe with Carp. Sure, he later trained under Cap, the feared 8-mountain ranker, and was ultimately defeated. But his raw power? Unquestionable." A low, sardonic laugh rippled through the crowd. "Heh! Not only can he deploy a domination gaze, but you can instantly recognize the look of an overlord when it's upon you." Nethin's fist hung frozen in midair, unwavering as Green Pepper's wild-eyed glare bore into him. The old man snorted, his gray and white beard flicking upward as if caught in a gale. "So you think you can stand against me?" he spat. Calmly, Nithin withdrew his hand. I didn't copy my style from anyone, he said evenly. I forged it myself through day-in, day-out training. Green Pepper laughed derisively. Self-taught, huh? Not bad, but without the right foundation, all that effort is brittle and will shatter under true power. With a roar, he slammed his palms together, then spun his body in a blur. Bald head lowered, he lunged forward in a brutal headbutt, his signature 8 colliding fists, skull crusher. Nethin didn't budge. He curled his right hand into a tight fist, swirling coiled force around it, and met Green Pepper's skull with an upward strike. The impact detonated like thunder, sending shockwaves rippling across the ground. Dust and debris sprayed into the air as the two warriors locked in their furious clash. In an instant, the ground cracked and heaved beneath Nithin's feet, chunks of earth splintering away as the decaying buildings around him groaned and shuddered. Dust and rubble rained down, carried on the echo of his twisting force. Across the shattered plaza, Green Pepper's muscles tensed, his head snapping from side to side as he readied himself. Nethin's arm trembled with barely contained power. Green Pepper's neck rippled with equally fierce energy. For nearly 2 seconds, neither combatant yielded. Their blows collided in midair, each strike answered by an equally violent counter. Then, with a low, resonant growl, Nethin unleashed the full surge of his ghost hand technique. The force ripped through Green Pepper's 8 consecutive punches, shattering the momentum behind them. In a single devastating motion, Nethin's fist drove into Green Pepper's skull. The impact sent Green Pepper rocketing backward. He smashed through 2 decrepit buildings in rapid succession, sending timber and stone spraying in all directions, and careened into the rubble beyond. Only then did his body slump to a halt, buried beneath collapsed beams and crumbling brick. A stunned silence fell over the onlookers at the edge of the plaza. Green Pepper, the feared leader, had been felled by a single blow. Whispers spread like wildfire. That's Ghost Hand Nethin's strength. Not even the legends could stand against it. Though Nethin's bounty had already climbed to 440 million Bailey, he was still just a newly risen star. Yet here he stood, unbowed and victorious, a testament to a power few had yet witnessed. Nethin's fist collided squarely with the legendary powerhouse's chest, proof enough that his strength had now reached the level of the older generation's elite. The onlookers' jaws dropped in disbelief. Then the shattered ruins beneath them groaned, and in a sudden burst of motion, the leader of Green Pepper emerged from the debris. Chunks of stone and splintered masonry fell away from his form, revealing him completely unharmed. A deep, mocking laugh rolled from his lips. Ha! Well done, boy. You've got power, but if you think that blow will beat me, you've still got a long way to go. Chapter 129, The Death of the Green Pepper, Part 4. Whoosh! Nethin's face remained impassive as he vaulted into the air. His left arm and right fist were wreathed in pulsing, domineering energy that merged with the warping force of distortion. Like a gathering storm, his blows descended mercilessly upon the Green Pepper. Cap! Nethin's punch slammed against the creature's skull, chipping away at its hardened shell, but barely enough to slow it down. Unfazed, the Green Pepper countered with equal ferocity, its own energy flaring as it anticipated Nethin's every move. Boom, boom, boom. Fist met fist in a deafening cascade of impacts that shook the very earth. Each collision sent shockwaves rippling outward. Debris rained from the sky, and the ground split beneath their feet. From the sidelines, onlookers winced and pressed trembling hands against their ears. The roar of battle filled the air, a relentless thunder that made even the hardiest veterans' eardrums ring. And still Nethin and the Green Pepper pressed on, exchanging blow after blow in a furious dance of power, neither willing to yield an inch. Nethin's blows came faster and harder with every passing second, and Qingjiao, whose strength nearly matched his, found herself sweating as she reeled backward, her feet gouging 2 deep furrows in the earth. His signature twisting power shattered her Bajiquan strikes one by one, battering her fists despite the ferocity of her armament haki. Normally, her haki could take the impact, but even the toughest defenses falter under relentless assault, and a creeping numbness began to spread through her arms. "Damn this kid!" she snarled, throat tight with effort. Shaking off the pain, she slammed her arms open and pressed her armored brow forward, channeling every ounce of her haki into a final, desperate headbutt. Boom! Nethin's fist met her forehead with bone-jarring force. This time, she planted her feet while he flew backward, airborne. For a heart-stopping moment, they hung in balance, the challenger steady, the prodigy hurtling through the air. Then, with a violent jolt, Qingjiao staggered and collapsed onto her backside, sliding down until she sat in the dust. Nethin rolled to his feet and took a cautious step back. Dazed, Qingjiao pressed a hand to her throbbing head. The sting brought back a humiliating memory, when Carp had flattened her scalp in a single blow, and her face twisted into a mask of fury and shame. "Argh!" she howled, clutching her head. The battlefield fell silent, the echo of that punch still ringing in the air. Nethin's roar tore through the air as he charged, head thrust forward in a brutal hammer blow. The green pepper monster met his strike head-on, and was hurled backward, crashing through half a dozen buildings without even so much as a scratch. Rhodes watched without expression. He paused only long enough to gather his strength, then sprang forward in a blur of motion. Before the creature could recover, he was already at its side, raining down fists as though the hulking foe were nothing more than a training dummy. This green pepper wasn't like the others they'd faced, Dalmesia or Lu Chi. It was a pure physical powerhouse, equally skilled in armed and unarmed combat, even able to track movements as fast as Luffy's second gear. On top of that, it boasted an uncanny toughness, shrugging off blows that would fell a lesser opponent. Boom, boom, boom. Rhodes's strikes landed in rapid succession, each jab and hook punctuated by the deafening echoes of impact. Still, his speed outmatched the monster's lumbering bulk, and he never gave it a moment's respite. Despite its enormous size and raw strength, the green pepper's dominance on the battlefield was finally being challenged, bit, by Rhodes's relentless assault. Nethin read Admiral Rhodes's movements like an open book, every feint, every pivot, parrying and riposting without pause. He lunged forward again, eyes blazing. "You insolent upstart," Nethin spat. "With such meager strength, you dare to defy the Empire and its navy. I could have feat you to the Admiral's blade, but no, I'll personally carve your head off as tribute for Lord Kai Yi." A sickly green distortion rippled outward from Nethin's frame, tightening around his muscles until every breath stabbed with pain. He ground his teeth and bellowed, "Profound eightfold fist, dragon unbound, claw unleashed." He swung in with everything he had. The ground shuddered beneath them as Nethin's fist, aglow with warped energy, smashed toward Rhodes's head. Even to Nethin's eyes, his punch looked unstoppable, thick, brutal, unstoppable. Rhodes didn't flinch. He simply raised a slender forearm and met the blow head-on. The impact cracked the air like thunder. In an instant, Nethin was hurled backward, his roar cut short as he crashed through 3 decrepit buildings in a row. Dust and splintered wood filled the sky, and he skidded to a halt dozens of yards away, chest heaving, vision blurred. Rhodes stood unmoved at the center of the wreckage, arms at his side, expression as calm as ever. The fight was far from over, but Nethin already knew he'd underestimated the Navy Admiral's true power. Nethin's two powers, the armed hue and the distortion force, had only just begun to blend when the battle tipped decisively in his favor. The fusion of these abilities, once tentative and clumsy, now moved toward a seamless, potent union. He'd already pulled ahead of Qingjiao in raw strength. After climbing free from the rubble, Qingjiao gasped and rubbed at a throbbing temple. He could sense it clearly. Nethin had grown even stronger. Yet despite the pain and the unwelcome realization of his opponent's rising power, Qingjiao, boasting his trademark bravado, refused to yield. With a furious roar, he lunged again. Their collision shook the ground. Fists and elbows flew, but this time, Qingjiao found himself on the back foot. He used to stand toe-to-toe with Nethin, trading dozens, sometimes hundreds of blows before even feeling winded. Now, after merely a dozen strikes, his arms felt heavy and unresponsive, as though weighted down by lead. Qingjiao's jaw clenched. He'd relied on his iron-hard defense and unbreakable endurance to overcome every threat. But against Nethin's perfected fusion of power, his defenses were finally beginning to crack. Still, there was no question of backing down. With a rasping cough, he squared his shoulders, gathered every last ounce of grit, and charged once more into the fray. Nethin realized the green pepper's defenses were already beginning to crack. His eyes flickered, and he deliberately softened his strikes, treating their shields like sandbags, while he continued honing the fusion of his domineering force and his distortion power. Whoosh! Whoosh! With each exchange, Nethin became more adept at merging the two energies into a single, fluid motion. At the same time, his command of distortion grew ever more precise. He caught fleeting glimpses of something greater, a way to hurl that warped energy outward, to launch it like a projectile beyond his own body. But the insight slipped away as quickly as it had come. As the fight dragged on, Nethin felt his stamina plummet toward dangerous levels. He drew in a long, steadying breath, his gaze hardening. No longer holding back, he unleashed the perfect synergy of domineering force and distortion power in one explosive punch aimed straight at the Green Peppers. Green Pepper howled in fury and launched himself at Rhodes with all his might, aiming a crushing headbutt at the armored warrior. For a heartbeat, his blow landed, but Rhodes was far stronger. With a single, bone-rattling swing, the pirate was hurled aside and driven into the earth, carving out a massive, humanoid-shaped crater. Rhodes staggered back, eyes wide with disbelief. How could a junior have grown so powerful in an instant? Before Green Pepper could scramble to his feet, a dark figure tore through the sky above the pit. Nethin plummeted into the hollow with the force of a meteor, shattering soil and stone in a series of deafening impacts that made the ground tremble beneath everyone's feet. When the final echoes died away and the shaking subsided, a lone man climbed from the depths. He was stained with blood around his clenched fist, yet his expression was eerily composed. In his mind, the familiar chime of a system reward rang out. Calmly, Nethin flexed his fingers and brushed the crimson away, revealing skin as pale and unmarked as before. The crater lay motionless, devoid of any sign of life. Green Pepper? Was he dead? A heavy silence fell over the arena. The legendary pirate had fallen, and with him, all hope of victory. July, year 13 of the Great Pirate Age. Captain Nethin of the Ghost Hand Pirates stood at the prow of his flagship, the Knight's Talon, as a crimson dawn broke over the horizon. Intelligence had led him here, to the notorious island of lawlessness, where the seas themselves whispered the name Qingjiao, a pirate warlord whose cruelty was matched only by the legend of his exploits. Under a roiling sky, Nethin's fleet clashed with Qingjiao's armada. Cannon fire rent the salt air, and cutlasses flashed in the spray of crashing waves. Amid the chaos, Nethin fought like a whirlwind, his blade carving a path straight to the warlord. When the dust settled, Qingjiao lay defeated at Nethin's feet, his banner bleeding in the surf. With a final, decisive stroke, Nethin ended the reign of the island's most feared pirate. As word of his victory spread from port to port, the seas themselves seemed to tremble. Tales of Captain Nethin's triumph would grow into legend, announcing to every corner of the world that a new power had arisen, one whom neither storm nor scoundrel could stand against. Chapter 130. How Far Is It to the General? Part 5. The Navy headquarters medical facility rose like a fortress in the heart of the city. On one of its upper floors lay a private ward where Lieutenant General Doberman sat alone by the window. His right arm was gone, replaced by layers of sterile bandages, and yet he held a newspaper in his left hand, studying it with the same steely focus he once reserved for the enemy fleet. Not long ago, during the First Battle of Spring Island, Doberman had suffered catastrophic wounds. The fleet surgeon aboard his flagship had done everything possible, but the damage was too severe. The arm had to be amputated, and even then, he nearly bled out. His internal injuries, both physical and moral, seemed destined to end his career. Yet the Naval High Command, perhaps mindful of his past victories, decided against stripping him of his rank or court-martialing him for the defeat. A colonel from headquarters stood by the bedside, clipboard in hand and concern etched on his face. Clearing his throat, he recited the formal communiqué. "Lieutenant General, this is the command's decision. We can reassign you to administrative duties here at headquarters, overseeing logistics and paperwork. Alternatively, you may accept a posting as an instructor at the Naval Recruit Training Camp." He paused, watching Doberman's profile in the afternoon light. The general's jaw was set, his good hand clenching the paper so tightly the edges curled. Finally, Doberman folded the newspaper, rose to his unsteady feet, and met the colonel's gaze. "I appreciate the options," he said, voice raspy but unwavering. "Give me 2 days. I'll decide then." The colonel nodded and stepped back, closing the door softly behind him. Doberman returned to the window, staring out at the harbor where his fleet once sailed. The distance between him and the next battle felt immeasurable, yet he knew better than to count himself out. Even with one arm, he intended to find a way back into the fight, and somewhere beyond that horizon, he would prove that a general's worth isn't measured by flesh and bone alone. Colonel Harding looked at Doberman's empty chair beside the window and sighed inwardly. He knew all too well that Doberman's injuries had robbed him of the ability to fight. From now on, his only duties would be poring over reports and drilling new recruits, and the colonel wasn't sure Doberman would bear that fate without breaking. Doberman himself sat motionless, one hand clasping the edge of an old newspaper. He barely registered his surroundings, though every few seconds he'd pinch a corner of the page and twist it into a tight little ball. The headlines blared tales of Hawkeye's duel with Carlos, and, in bold type, Nethin's gruesome decapitation of the infamous pirate lord Green Pepper. Colonel Harding moved to stand just behind him, voice low with concern. "Sir, I don't know if he'll take this well," he admitted. Doberman always pushed himself to match Rhodes' meteoric rise, from a nobody on the West Sea Fleet to a hero celebrated across the Empire. It was Doberman's unwavering loyalty that led to his downfall. "I fear that if we saddle him now with these empty honors, he may never recover." Passing a hand over his stubbled jaw, Harding glanced once more at Doberman's bowed head. All the bravado in the world wouldn't mend a broken spirit, or a broken man. Colonel Doberman set down his newspaper with a deep sigh. "All right," he said. "Go back and tell the Lieutenant General I'll remain here at headquarters to handle the paperwork." The headquarters colonel, well aware of Doberman's iron will and his unwavering belief in strength and absolute justice, looked surprised. "Lieutenant General," Doberman's lips curved into a faint, weary smile. "I'm done fighting. You have no idea what I've seen and endured. Now go." "Yes, sir." The colonel saluted crisply and left the room. No sooner had the door clicked shut than Doberman's expression shifted. The polite smile contorted into something hideous, a flicker of madness dancing in his eyes. A low, chilling laugh escaped him as he snatched the newspaper back up and stared at the report on Rhodes. Losing his strength had been more agonizing than death, but he refused to die. There was one spectacle he had to witness: Rhodes's ruin. He would watch every miserable moment. "I'll be watching you, Pirate Nethin," he whispered, voice dripping with malice. After facing Nethin in a one-on-one showdown and poring over every scrap of intelligence we could find, we understood his nature completely. He would never bow to anyone. Unhinged and alone, Nethin's only drive was freedom. Even if he somehow broke through the Navy's blockade and made it into the New World, every mile of open sea would become his enemy. He'd be caught in a vice between the Navy and the 4 emperors. And we'll watch it happen. He'll be crushed, either captured by the Navy and thrown into Advanced City's prison, or cut down by one of the emperors in a desperate last stand. Yet, no matter how excruciating his fate, he will cling to life. He will never see Rhodes's downfall. He will not die. Lawless Island. After cutting down the island's leader, Green Pepper, and delivering the fatal blow, Rhodes and Robin slipped back aboard the Ghost. They left Lafitte behind to roam the island at will, his recording device running until its magnetic tape was full. Nethin stood atop the ruined deck, the tattered flag of Green Pepper's crew fluttering at his feet. When the smoke cleared and the last pirate fell, the headsman's bounty for the gang's leader stood at 580 million berries, the highest reward he'd ever seen. True to form, Nethin received every last berry, along with a gleaming notification: "Mission complete. Terminus of Green Pepper. Reward 580,000 berries. Bonus: 1 free talent point. Talent proficiency gained 120. A grin spread across his face. This haul dwarfed the prize for defeating a vice admiral. With a few seconds to spare before the next wave of reinforcements arrived, Nethin opened his General Systems talent tree. Golden light pulsed along the branching paths. He pondered his options, then assigned 50 of his new proficiency points to physical enhancement. Immediately, the system's display updated. Agility enhancement, 200, max. Physical enhancement, 400, max. Toughness, 50, intermediate. A warm current surged through his veins, knitting new power into his muscles. His strength index climbed beyond 400, just shy of the 500-point ceiling. Nethan flexed his fingers, feeling the familiar hum of raw power beneath his skin. 70 proficiency points remained unspent. He tapped his chin, weighing the possibilities. Should he shore up his toughness next, or pour points into a specialized skill? As distant alarms began to wail, he knew he couldn't tarry forever. Nethan closed his eyes, ready to make the next move and rewrite the rules of the battlefield once more. After a moment's hesitation, Nethan finally resolved to invest 50 proficiency points into his armament hockey. Up until now, the 15 points he earned from slaying Mogu the Ripper had all gone into his distortion fruit, strengthening its twisting power just enough. But with 20 points already applied, any further boost would be significant, and with 50 more, he could achieve a near-perfect fusion of armament hockey and distortion. That fusion was exactly what he needed. The next time he crossed paths with the Navy, there was an excellent chance he'd be facing one of its admirals. Aokiji, Kizaru, and Akainu were all natural-born powerhouses, fighters whose very presence dwarfed the likes of Smoker or Crocodile. Nethan's current hockey might overwhelm lesser opponents, but against an admiral, even his combined hockey distortion strikes might not break their bodies. He had only to recall the Summit War to understand the gulf he faced. Marco the Phoenix and Vista had joined forces and unleashed their armament hockey on Akainu, yet they hadn't managed so much as a scratch. Nethan tightened his grip, determination burning in his chest. With this new allocation of proficiency, he would close that gap. He had no intention of being outmatched by the Navy's greatest warriors. Nethan closed his eyes and let his thoughts drift to the Battle of Marineford. Of all the rookies and veterans clashing that day, only one man, Whitebeard, had actually managed to land a blow on Admiral Akainu. He'd witnessed it himself and never forgotten how utterly overwhelming that display of power had been. A soft, golden glow flickered at the edge of his vision. Startled, Nethan opened his eyes. His display of armament hockey, specifically the brute force branch he'd long ignored, had just leapt forward in proficiency by 50 points. That single jump was enough to elevate that facet of his hockey to the intermediate tier, significantly boosting his raw power. "Armament," he whispered, recalling the command in his mind. In the center of the training chamber lay an unremarkable square iron block, its dull surface giving no hint of the trial ahead. Nethan shifted into a combat stance, sealed his right fist in hardened hockey, and swung. Boom! The air itself seemed to shudder as his fist connected with the iron block. Even with the room's soundproofing absorbing most of the shockwaves, the thunderous impact rippled through every corner of the Ghost Shadow's training hall. When the dust settled, the iron block bore a deep, clear imprint of Nethan's fist, an indentation nearly a palm's depth. He glanced back and forth between that mark and the block, then recalled the strength of Green Pepper's armament hockey. In a silent nod, he acknowledged what he'd already known. Breaking the iron block at this level was proof enough. With his newfound intermediate proficiency, Nethan now had the muscle to stand a chance against a vice admiral in a straight-up fight, and he was only just getting started. Nethan stared at his battle panel. He still had 20 unassigned points, and the rest of his stats read: Gunshots, 50, Melee Combat, 100, Twisted Fruit, 480, Navy 6 Shave, Navy 6 Form, Paper Painting, 0, Naval 6th Form, Moonstep, 0, Domineering Force, 50, Armored Domination, 50. How far am I from matching a Navy Admiral's strength? Nethan muttered under his breath. Chapter 131, Revolutionary Army. First update. Nethan closed the talent system and exhaled deeply, steadying himself. He needed to acclimate to the surge of power now coursing through his muscles. Slowly, he flexed his limbs, feeling the new strength settle into every fiber of his body. At that moment, shadows moved through the shattered ruins behind him and glided toward the shore. Moonlight flickered off the fragmented hull of the Ghost Shadow, a spectral ship said to ferry secrets across the seas. Leading the small party was a slender woman whose grace belied the tactical purpose of her mission. She wore an unusual, wide-brimmed hat that cast her face in shadow, a loose jacket left unbuttoned over a simple top, and a wavy, short skirt that swirled around her knees. A pair of dark sunglasses perched on her nose, hiding the sharp intelligence in her eyes. Two men in austere gray robes followed her closely. One paused at the water's edge, studied the ghost shadow, and spoke in a low, respectful tone. "It matches the dossier perfectly. This is the same vessel." They stepped forward in unison, intent on boarding the ship. But before they could reach the shoreline, Nico Robin emerged quietly at Nethan's side. She watched the newcomers with calm, calculating eyes, her posture taut and ready to spring into action at the slightest provocation. The lead woman halted and tilted her head. Robin's hand hovered at her side, ready to unravel the next moment with her devil fruit power. Nethan felt the tension ripple through her stance. "Stand down," Robin called softly, though firm enough to carry across the moonlit beach. "We have no intention of attacking." The woman slid off her sunglasses, revealing eyes that glinted with both curiosity and caution. "Is that so?" Her voice was smooth, with a hint of steel. "Then you won't mind if I introduce myself. I'm Stacia of the Revolutionary Army. We've been tracking the ghost shadow, and you two." Nethan squared his shoulders, meeting Stasia's gaze. "I'm Nethan," he said evenly, "and I'm not your enemy. But if you threaten this ship, I will defend it." Stacia studied him for a long moment, then nodded once. "Very well, we're here on reconnaissance. Nothing more, for now." Robin relaxed her stance just a fraction, but her eyes never left Stacia. Nethan, too, braced himself for whatever might come next, aware that this unexpected encounter could change everything. The woman walking at the prow looked up at Nethan, who stood by the side of the ghost shadow. Her pale pink lips curved into a gentle smile as she spread her hands in a peaceful gesture, clearly no threat. At the sound of his name, Nethan startled for a moment, but he didn't lower his guard. In a low voice he asked, "Who are you?" With deliberate grace, the woman raised one hand and tilted her sunglasses down the bridge of her nose. She offered him a sweet, confident smile. "Revolutionary Army," she replied. "I'm Belobet, commander of the Eastern Army." After stating her rank, she smiled again and nodded toward the ship. "You've already filed your report. Why not invite us aboard for a seat?" "Revolutionary Army," Nethan echoed, visibly taken aback. He'd never expected to run into a Revolutionary Army unit or one of its commanders out here. The Revolutionary Army and the world government treated each other as mortal enemies, branding each other's leaders criminals. Yet here stood Belobet, extending an invitation rather than a challenge. Belobet noticed his hesitation. She raised her palms in a final gesture of goodwill. "Please trust me," she said softly. "We bear you no ill will." Nethan studied her calm expression and poised stance. The next move was his, but for the moment, the tense standoff softened into cautious curiosity on both sides. A tall soldier of the Revolutionary Army stepped out from behind Belobeti and fixed Nethan with a steady, earnest gaze. "They call you the Lamp of Revolution," he said quietly. "We've hunted for you for nearly 5 years. You're the only survivor of Ohara, the kingdom that defied the world." At that, Nethan lowered his raised hand. The soldier offered him a warm, reassuring smile. "Now that we've found you, we'll do everything in our power to protect you from the government. That is our commander's order." Nethan's eyes brightened. "Your commander?" The soldier's expression grew solemn and respectful. "He's known as Dragon, the supreme leader of the Revolutionary Army. If there's anyone the world government fears most, it's him. The 4 emperors may be powerful, but they rarely challenge the world government directly, almost never attack the navy, and have no real interest in overthrowing the regime. Dragon, however, he's a different story altogether." Nethan stepped onto the deck, his eyes locked on the endless blue horizon. Dragons were unlike any other threat. The Revolutionary Army existed solely to topple Tianlong's rule and bring down the world government. And if the government ever learned the dragon's whereabouts, they wouldn't hesitate to send in CP0's entire force, and perhaps even dispatch 2 admirals to eliminate it in a single covert strike. "Since you're with the Revolutionary Army, come on up and take a seat," Nethan called back over his shoulder to Robin. He'd been flaunting his confidence all morning in the exercise room, and when Belobeti's party quietly came aboard, he'd taken his time showering and changing before emerging fresh and composed. Even across the deck, Ghost Hand Rhodes gave him a nod of recognition. Bilobetti smiled at Nethan, then vaulted from the lifeboat to land gracefully beside Rhodes and Robin. The playful grin faded from her face as she regarded them both with serious eyes. "You're in grave danger," she said quietly. "Everyone knows what you've done and what you're risking. If you need to make a clean getaway, we'll do everything in our power to protect you and see you safely to Revolutionary Army headquarters." Nethan sat across from the Revolutionary Army emissaries in the dimly lit briefing chamber. Their leader, a tall, somber man with a scar that ran from temple to jaw, spoke first. "If you, Captain Nethan, pledge your loyalty to the revolution, we will move heaven and earth to keep you from the world government's reach," he said. "All we ask in return is your absolute obedience." He leaned forward, voice low. "Your crewmate Robin is far more valuable to us. She alone can decipher the forbidden void history, a text so dangerous that the world government once issued a demon slaughter decree against O'Hara, erasing the entire island to bury her research. Compared to her, you're an unknown variable, and that uncertainty makes you expendable." Another officer chimed in. "Protecting Robin is one thing. Guarding you and the entire Ghost Hand pirates against a Marine Admiral is quite another. Our forces are still nascent. Only Dragon himself can match an Admiral's might. Even if you were to swear fealty, we can't guarantee your safety. The risk is simply too great." A hush fell over the room as the emissary's words sank in. Nethan's face remained calm, his dark eyes steady in the torchlight. Finally, he shook his head. "I'm grateful for the offer," he said evenly, "but I won't join any faction. My path must remain my own. With the gift system guiding me, I answer to no one but myself." Pirates are his prey, and Doflamingo is high on his list of targets. But he's wary of hiding out with the Revolutionary Army. Joining them wouldn't change the fact that the world government has declared them enemies. Any revolutionary spotted on the run only draws more frantic pursuit from Navy forces, and capture means brutal interrogation at the very least. If he enlisted, the government and Navy would escalate their manhunt against him. It would only make things worse. Bilobetti let out a frustrated sigh. "We have a powerful intelligence network," he urged. "With our contacts, we can slip through government lines far more easily than you think. We can avoid their encirclement and suppression." Nethan said nothing. Instead, he met Robin's calm gaze. Bin offered a small, regretful smile. "I'm sorry," she said quietly, "but my loyalty lies with the captain." Bilobetti's lips curled into a knowing smirk, as though he'd expected no other answer. He shook his head, stepped to the railing, and without another word, dove into the water and disappeared toward the shore. She took 2 steps as if a thought had just struck her. Turning to Nethan, she lifted her sunglasses and said in a controlled, solemn voice, "The Admiral has his eye on you. Be very careful from here on out. I don't want to hear that the Navy finally caught up with you." Bilobetti offered him a faint smile and let her shades slide back down. "If fate allows, perhaps we'll meet again." Her expression softened as she looked off into the distance. She admired Rhodes' unbreakable spirit, how she refused to bow to the Navy or the government, how she persisted in hunting pirates and stamping out corruption even when she was at her weakest. It was a fiercely honorable fight. Yet Bilobetti knew the wider picture was grim. The Revolutionary Army was holed up in Tibet, barely scraping by, far too scattered and weakened to join forces with Rhodes against the Admiral. All anyone could do was hope that Rhodes's luck held out, that she could stay one step ahead of the Admiral's relentless pursuit. And even that hope seemed a tall order. Chapter 132, Revised. Robin watched the 3 figures of the Revolutionary Army vanish into the distance. She turned back to Nethan with a faint, knowing smile. "I thought you might hesitate at least once," she teased. "But if you were the sort to follow orders, you'd be wearing a naval uniform by now." Nethan shook his head. He couldn't settle quietly in Tibet alongside the revolutionaries. Overthrowing the Tianlong government wasn't his battle. He'd taken up arms only because the Navy and the government had left him no choice. Duserman's provocations were just the spark. The real conspiracy stretched all the way to the highest echelons of both naval command and civil administration. Their interests ran in lockstep. Preserving their prestige mattered far more to them than the life of a single pirate. "That," Nethan said softly, "is why they'll never lift my bounty or admit they were wrong." Their pride is worth more than justice. He met Robin's gaze steadily. There's no turning back, for them or for me. Robin nodded, her expression serious now. Whatever lay ahead, she and Nethan would face it together. Nethan's eyes flashed with determination as he shoved aside his distracting thoughts and turned to face Robin. How is your devil fruit ability coming along? And what about your hockey training? A month ago, he had already shared the basics of armament hockey with both Robin and Lafitte, knowing that no one, especially in the perilous waters of the New World, could afford to be defenseless. While Robin and the others weren't frontline fighters, Nethan believed they still needed enough strength to hold their own when danger struck. Robin raised an eyebrow, curious about what her captain had in mind. Nethan let out a short snort and nodded. You've learned the theory. Now it's time to put it into practice. Let's see how far you've come. Lafitte, meanwhile, was largely left to his own devices. Nethan trusted the navigator's instincts. As for Shilu, he'd received regular guidance on devil fruit techniques and hockey discipline, a regimen that Robin had shared in fitful sessions whenever she wasn't buried in research. Robin folded her arms, expression unreadable. What kind of test are you planning? Nethan's grin was all challenge. Simple. We'll spar, just the two of us. Show me your devil fruit in action, and let's see if your hockey can stand up to a real attack. He paused, letting his gaze sharpen. Don't hold back. Robin's lips curved into a faint smile. Very well. I accept. She rose to her feet, bracing herself for the trial that would prove whether she and her powers were truly ready for the New World's dangers. Nethan couldn't shake the odd feeling in his chest as he glanced at Robin, then stepped onto the deck with his hands clasped behind his back. Just a routine inspection, he said, as if it were the most natural thing in the world. Rhodes watched in amazement. Robin's training was surging ahead far faster than he dared hope. Her mastery of Wanzikenhong was blossoming, and for the first time, a faint aura of armament, hockey, an iron-cold glimmer, danced around her forearms. In theory, armament hockey wasn't hard to learn. Once your body was strong enough, you could summon it. But hardening that hockey, reinforcing your skin like tempered steel, had foiled countless practitioners. Even Shilu, who'd descended from Sky Island, had spent months attempting to solidify his armament hockey without so much as a single tremor of hardness. Robin's own breakthrough was modest, a mere whisper of hockey coating her arm, but Rhodes knew better than to underestimate small gains. Even the lightest sheen of armament, hockey boosts both defense and attack. In their world, every fraction of strength counted. Still, Rhodes reminded himself that nurturing a crew capable of challenging the four emperors in only a few months remained a colossal task. Robin's progress was promising, but the voyage ahead was long and littered with far tougher hurdles than this. Nethan left the cabin quietly, his mind still buzzing from the sparring tests he'd just overseen. Robin, Roger, and the others had put in an honest effort, yet none of them matched the intensity of Luo's drive. If only they could push themselves the way he did. Most of the crew trained at his direction, but except for Luo, they went through the motions, lacking real conviction or that burning desire to grow stronger. Shaking off his frustration, Nethan climbed onto the deck rail. With a single graceful leap, he dropped 3 feet, then froze, suspended in midair above the dark sea. He clenched his right hand into a fist, every muscle tense. "Twisted fist," he whispered. His fingers twisted together, knuckles whitening. Nethan's stern gaze locked onto the water's surface. Then, with a sudden roar of effort, he drove his fist downward into the calm waves. The world held its breath, but the sea barely rippled. The air around him hung stubbornly still. He frowned. He still couldn't turn the surrounding air into a conduit for his devil fruit power. In fact, he couldn't push his fruit's distortion energy beyond his own body at all. Retreating his arm, Nethan stared at his palm, as if expecting to see something new there. True, the tremor fruit granted him incredible internal strength, but without the ability to channel that force outward, like Whitebeard did with his quake shockwaves, it remained trapped within. A slow, thoughtful smile curved Nethan's lips. Every power had its weakness, and he intended to find a way to overcome this one. Nethan paced the deck, replaying his last fight with Green Pepper in his mind. Distortion powers anchored inside the user were essentially useless, but during that battle, When he'd pushed his abilities to the limit, he'd felt something new, a fleeting sensation, as if the distortion could be forced out of his body and unleashed on the world. And then it vanished before he could seize it. He paused, eyes narrowing in thought. There were 3 devil fruits of the same lineage, twist fruit, split fruit, and shake fruit, each representing twist, split, and shake. Why, he wondered, did their effects differ so wildly? He thought of the clown, Bucky, and his split fruit. Bucky's power could tear his own flesh to ribbons, rendering him almost immune to edged weapons. It was a brutal trick, but limited to self-destruction. Hardly impressive. Yet Nethin's mind raced on. What if that splitting ability affected everything it touched, not just the user? A silent, instantaneous laceration, ripping through enemy ships, slicing the sea itself. Amplified to its peak, one swing might carve an entire island and its inhabitants into fragments, like Doflamingo's birdcage, but infinitely more devastating. And still, this split fruit remained self-targeted. Such raw potential, shackled by its own design, left it pale beside the finesse of distortion or the raw force of shock. Nethin shook his head. Mastery of devil fruit power wasn't just about strength, it was about finding the thread of true utility and learning how to pull it free, and he was determined to discover exactly how. Nethin stared thoughtfully at his gloved hands, flexing his fingers as if testing the limits of his own body. Every time he did, the familiar, rubbery sensation coursed through him, proof that his twist fruit powers lay coiled just beneath his skin. But what if things had turned out differently? He remembered hearing rumors of other fruits with similar themes but opposite effects. Take the so-called shock fruit, for instance, an external vibration ability that could pummel an opponent with waves of concussive force. Then there was the torn fruit, which allegedly ripped targets apart, limb from limb. Both of those fruits worked outwardly, hostile, aggressive powers. Word was that inward versions existed too, a shaking fruit that could turn its user into a human massage device, quivering from the inside, and a theoretical split fruit that warped one's own flesh into grotesque shapes. If those inward variants did exist, Nethin mused, they'd be utterly useless in a fight, maybe entertaining at a carnival, but no real combat advantage. The shaking fruit user might be popular with thrill-seeking girls, but he'd never match a true fighter. Conversely, an internal split fruit would twist its host's body into strange silhouettes, but offer no outward offensive bite. Nethin's twist fruit was different. Its twisting power worked just as well on his own limbs as it would on an outside object, though he was limited to reshaping himself. He could contort his arms into spring-like coils or compress his torso into a tight, springy ball. It made him practically invulnerable, but it didn't let him reach out and strangle an enemy from across the room. Was that because his fruit was the external version of the twist type, while an internal version would deform the user's body in painful, self-directed knots? Standing in the dim light of the training hall, Nethin ran through the possibilities. If there really were 6 distinct fruits, external shock, internal shake, external twist, external split, internal split, then he had to count his blessings. Securing an external twist fruit had been nothing short of lucky. Had he drawn an external shock, he'd be a battering ram. An external split fruit would shred anything in range, and if he'd ended up with an internal version of any of those, he might be trapped in a twisted, useless form. A wry smile crossed his lips. All that remained was to see how he measured up against Robin and her flower fruit. An encounter with a blooming adversary promised to test the limits of his twist fruit powers, and perhaps reveal exactly where his fruit stood among the 6. Forget it, Nethin muttered, a faint twitch at the corner of his mouth. He brushed the thought aside and didn't dwell on it any longer. Chapter 133, No Clues, Part 3. Nethin paused, turning the possibilities over in his mind. Could the external shock that Blackbeard now wields actually be the result of Whitebeard's shock fruit having awakened? It was a tantalizing theory. After all, how else could Blackbeard unleash such devastating power the moment he seized the fruit? The only way it made sense was if Edward Newgate had already pushed his devil fruit to its awakened state before his death. If that were true, then the strange tingling I'd felt, an almost electric distortion just beneath my skin, might be the first stirrings of a devil fruit awakening. But I could recall almost no precedent for a paramecia-type fruit achieving that level of power. The only case I'd ever heard of was the prison warden's beast in Impel Down, whose Zoan ability had awakened and transformed him into a monster of strength and savagery. Accounts of awakened paramecia were rarer still, far fewer than even the stories of natural or ancient Zoan awakenings. If my own fruit were beginning to stir, the implications would be monumental. Nithin looked down at his trembling hands, his heart both anxious and exhilarated. Whatever lay ahead, this might be the turning point he had long sought. Nithin had long been entertaining a single, electrifying possibility. The twisted light and twisted gravity abilities granted by his talent system might actually be early expressions of his devil fruit power, skills that ordinary fruit users only gain once they awaken. If that were true, then when his fruit finally did awaken, every ability he already wielded would surge in strength, transforming him in ways he could barely imagine. He might not instantly become an admiral, but at the very least, he could stand toe-to-toe with someone like Doflamingo. Determined to test the theory, Nithin closed his eyes and allowed the twisting energy to roll through him from head to toe. He felt the familiar hum, the coiling force, but beyond that, nothing. No sudden epiphany, no burst of newfound power. He'd always found the original text's treatment of devil fruit awakening frustratingly vague, and now, after pushing himself to the limit, he still had no idea what the next step should be. A thought struck him then. He'd almost forgotten about CP9. Over the years, Nithin had sifted through countless classified files in the World Government Archives, files that surely contained rumors or reports of awakened devil fruits. If anyone had cracked the secret of instantaneous awakening, it would be them. He would need to revisit the CP9 dossiers and see what secrets lay buried in those shadows. Nithin paused for a moment, then headed back to the cabin. He produced a concealed comms device, a so-called bug, and tapped in Kaku's secure frequency. Today, Kaku was in temporary command of the intelligence team, a detail that had ruffled Gabra's feathers, though he hadn't protested too strongly. The connection clicked into place. Normally, Robin handled all direct contact with CP9's operatives, but every so often, Nithin preferred to give orders himself. Kaku, Nithin greeted quietly. Have you ever encountered any information on Devil Fruit Awakening? There was a flicker of surprise in Kaku's voice. Devil Fruit Awakening? No, that's new to me. I'll check with Gabra and the others right away. As Kaku spoke, he tapped his own device to reach Gabra, then turned to Bruno, who stood nearby. Both agents shook their heads. Sorry, Captain, Bruno said. We've never seen any reports about a Devil Fruit Awakening. We can start digging into it, though, if you want. Nithin nodded, though he wasn't surprised. Even with CP9's reputation for ruthlessly thorough intelligence gathering, Kaku and his team weren't endowed with Robin's photographic memory. They investigated only what was immediately necessary. Do that, Nithin said. Let me know as soon as anything turns up. He ended the transmission and slipped the bug back into his pocket, already plotting the next move in his search for answers. Now that CP9's cover has been blown, we can no longer tap into the government's intelligence apparatus or access its central databases. By the way, Kaku's voice crackled through the Den Den Mushi. I'm about to send you everything we've got on the supernovas and the Chiwuhai. Nithin rose from his desk and made his way to the Den Den Mushi chamber, his private vault of communication snails. Rows of them lined the shelves, each tagged with a neat label. Long-range models, underwater units, voice-only bugs. And here, at last, the video Den Den Mushi he needed. With a decisive snap, he lifted it from its perch. He pressed it to life. Instantly, a pale gray glow rippled across the whitewashed wall, and the snail began to hum. Nithin steadied his breath as static crackled, then cleared. In a flash, the air before him resolved into Kaku's face, and behind it, a detailed map. Here, Kaku said, pointing to a cluster of islands. These are the supernova sightings over the past fortnight, and here, he zoomed in, is everything we know about the Chiwuhai Route. Study it carefully. We don't have much time. Nithin spread the newly acquired chart of the Grand Route out before him. It was far more detailed than the map Rhodes had managed to secure today. Nearly all the islands in the first half of the sea were plotted, and even a handful in the second half showed up. Every supernova pirate and each of the 7 warlords of the sea was marked, from Doflamingo to Gecko Moria. Yet the chart wasn't complete. Some names, Hawkeye Mihawk and Black Tyrant Leffy, for example, had either evaded inclusion or slipped Rhodes's notice. And as for the supernovas, who had bounties north of 200 million berries, they'd already plunged into the New World. All of them. Nethin studied the price tags one by one. In the first half of the Grand Route, only 1 pirate sported a bounty over 200 million. 2 more hovered between 100 and 200 million, but they were located so far away that mounting a pursuit felt reckless, impractical. Even the warlords were out of easy reach, save one. His finger paused on a single name, Gecko Moria. The map unmistakably placed the former Shichibukai deep within the Devil's Triangle. If Rhodes had flagged any one target for immediate pursuit, it would have to be Moria. Nithin folded the chart carefully. The Devil's Triangle was no playground, but if there was a chance to nab a warlord, any warlord, it had to be taken. With a steadying breath, he turned toward the ship's rail, where Rhodes was pacing below and the sea stretched endlessly before them. Their next move was clear. All that remained was to prepare, or be prepared for the unexpected that lay ahead. The Devil's Triangle Sea sits just off the island of Lawlessness, its currents nearly brushing the storm sea to form a continuous, triangular loop. Nithin studied the chart he'd saved on his display, then tapped his comlink. Kaku, listen up. Our next priority is to gather intelligence on any devil fruit awakenings, especially the rust fruit, the iron fruit, and the barrier fruit, and determine exactly where each will reappear. He paused, recalling what happened to their former wielders. We've already dispatched the last masters of those fruits. As you know, when a devil fruit user dies, the fruit's power resurfaces somewhere at sea after a while. The only person capable of preventing that rebirth and seizing the ability outright is Blackbeard Tiki, thanks to his dark fruit. I don't have that edge. A crackle of agreement came through. True, none of them match the Thunder Fruit's raw power, Kaku warned, but each is formidable in its own right. Exactly, Nethin replied. Claiming even one would give us significant firepower. 3 such abilities could make us unstoppable. And stay sharp. The Navy's been tightening its net around these waters. Report anything unusual immediately. With that, Nethin plotted their course through the Devil's Triangle, eyes fixed on the prize that would tip the balance of power in their favor. Nethin slipped the tiny commune Icatian bug into his pocket and tapped the screen one last time. If there's any major activity, report it to me immediately, he said. Understood, came Kaku's reply before the line went dead. He retrieved the image he'd saved earlier and studied it for several moments, committing every detail to memory. Then he rose, left his cabin, and made his way down the corridor to Robin's quarters. Standing before her door, he pressed his hand against the wood. With a soft creak, the latch slid back and the door swung open. Robin leaned against her bed in a light shirt, her damp hair falling around her shoulders as though she'd just finished training and stepped out of the shower. Her slender, ivory feet rested against the windowsill, and she didn't look up from the book in her hands. Captain, she said evenly. What's the matter? First, Nethin replied, stepping inside and closing the door behind him with the heel of his hand. Let Lafitte know we're heading for the Devil's Triangle. Then there's something else I need to ask you. Robin set her book aside and gave him her full attention. Nethin drew a breath. You've read through the Devil Fruit Pokédex, right? Have you ever come across anything about Devil Fruit Awakening? Devil Fruit Awakening, Robin echoed, her brow furrowing as she recalled. A spark of recognition glittered in her eyes. Yes, she said slowly. I've seen that term before, though I never found any detailed explanation. Robin paused for a moment, shook her head at Nethin, and said, I should have looked that term up long ago. Back then, I'd never even heard of devil fruits. I wasn't interested. Nethin nodded once, his eyes drifting to Robin's long, smooth legs stretched out on the windowsill. Then he turned and walked inside. Chapter 134, Devil's Triangle Sea Area, Part 4. Nethin slipped out of Robin's cabin and made his way back to the deck. He paused for a moment, gazing out over the endless expanse of water, then sprang into action. Channeling his gravity-twisting ability, he hovered just above the waves. With a focused surge of power, he drove that force downward into the sea, and a swirling, funnel-shaped vortex opened beneath his feet. Without hesitation, Nethin let himself drop into the maw of the whirlpool and plunged beneath the surface. Once submerged, he pressed his hand against the neighboring water. His twisting gravity repelled the liquid, carving out a perfectly spherical air pocket around him, like a clear bubble suspended in the deep. He touched down on the sandy seabed, no more than 10 meters below the surface. Looking up through the sphere of air, he could still see daylight dancing on the waves far above. Turning his gaze to the rocky outcrops and patches of coral around him, Nethin advanced slowly across the seafloor. After an indeterminate time, he raised his arm and slammed it upward through the water column. In an instant, every drop of water, dozens of meters above, vanished, clearing a straight path back to the surface. Now, with the way open and the ocean sealed off behind him, Nethin prepared for whatever lay ahead. With a thunderous crack, the sea split where Nethin's outstretched palms had torn the waves apart. In the next instant, he thrust his foot down with explosive force, launching himself skyward, and landed squarely on the ocean's surface. Hundreds of meters of water roared upward as if freed from gravity, spiraling into the sky and converging into a colossal orb of electric blue. The sphere hovered in mid-air, silent and immense, while panicked fish darted within its translucent walls. Nethin steadied himself on that living platform of water, vast enough to engulf an entire warship and still tremble under his command. Every muscle burned as he drew his distortion powers to their absolute limit, desperate to trigger the awakening of his devil fruit. The strain lifted him slightly off the sphere's surface, and in that moment, a wave of exhaustion crashed through him. His breaths came in ragged gasps. Each beat of his heart felt like wading through molasses. All the while, the water orb continued to swell, growing ever larger with every passing second. Nethin stared at the glimmering orb of water hovering before him, willing it to obey. He refused to touch it directly. Instead, he tried to bend its gravity through sheer force of will. But his concentration cracked. 10 seconds in, the sphere quivered and collapsed, sending a spray of droplets down to the sea. 20 seconds later, it fragmented into larger chunks that splashed away. By 30 seconds, it had dissolved completely, returning to the ocean as if it had never existed. "Not like this," Nethin murmured, frustration tightening his chest. He held out his palm, and there, as if conjured by magic, was a fist-sized water orb, suspended just inches above his skin. It hovered serenely for a moment, then slowly slipped downward. As it touched his palm, it froze in mid-fall. A heartbeat passed. Then, as though summoned again, it sailed upward, seizing its place in the air. Touch downward, pause, rise. The cycle repeated over and over. At last, Nethin shook his head and flung the orb aside. He sprinted back to the ship's railing, took a jagged breath, and plunged into the open sea. Beneath the waves, he summoned another massive sphere of water. 1 attempt, 2, 3. He lost count of how many times he coached a globe into form, only to see it tremble and dissolve. Each exhaustion drove him back on deck for a few swallows of water, a quick bite, and a rub to loosen his aching limbs. Then he dove back under and began again. Hour by hour, his technique sharpened. He learned to draw the water molecules into a flawless sphere, to suspend it with pinpoint precision, to tease its gravitational field with only a thought. His mastery grew so subtle that, one afternoon, he plucked a steamed shrimp from the galley table and used his devil fruit power to peel it, shell removed without crushing the tender meat inside. When at last he climbed back onto the deck, the sun was low on the horizon. Nethin gazed out over the endless blue, a quiet confidence settling in his chest. The sea had taught him its secrets, and he was only getting started. Nethin had learned, during every clash with the pirate King Green Pepper, to recognize that fleeting rush of power, an almost tangible urge to unleash his distortion ability. But each time he tried to summon it, the energy dissipated. Was his distortion technique simply too weak? As he drilled day after day, the question nagged at him. Perhaps, he thought, his capacity truly wasn't enough, much like an underdeveloped physique unable to withstand the 6th naval style. A week later, the recording pointer's magnetic reservoir was at last fully charged. Lafitte reboarded the Ghost Shadow and set the Tri-Arrow recording pointer to guide them into the Devil's Triangle. Nethin watched the dials with steely resolve. If his distortion power remained inadequate, he would ask Moria to help him strengthen it. 10 days out from the storm's wrath, the ghost shadow slipped beneath a blanket of thick, rolling fog. This was the infamous Devil's Triangle, no true home to Moria, but a region warped by its own strange climate. Even now, at the close of the 13th year of the Great Pirate Era, mariners whispered of its disorienting currents and near-impenetrable mist. Compasses quivered, visibility collapsed to mere feet, and every sailor risked drifting forever into its ghostly depths. Yet here they were, sailing straight into the unknown. The fog lay thick and motionless around the ghost shadow, turning the sea into a gray void. Captain Lafitte stood at the bow, eyes straining as he gauged wind and current, but he could make out nothing beyond the mist. Frustrated, he shook his head. At his side, Rhodes glanced anxiously at the blank horizon. "Robin," he called over his shoulder, "what's our status? How long will our food and fresh water last?" Robin, who had been tallying the stores below deck, looked up. "At our current rationing, about 6 weeks," he replied. Then he cast a half-amused glance toward Nethin. "And between us, Nethin's appetite is the biggest on board. His cultivation demands so much energy that he can eat as much as Siru and I combined." Rhodes whistled under his breath. "Thank the sea we aren't landlocked. With my ocean's grasp, I can net enough fish in minutes, and diving to the seabed for shellfish is no problem." Captain Lafitte nodded, relief faintly tugging at his features. "Very well. Let's forget bearing and compass for now. This stretch of water isn't vast. If we circle through it carefully, we'll eventually cross paths with whoever, or whatever we're hunting." The vast three-masted sailing ship that housed Gecko Moria loomed like an island on the horizon, but it wasn't an island at all, and its position couldn't be pinned down by any ordinary charts. All Nethin knew was that they were somewhere within the Devil's Triangle Sea, but beyond that, his bearings were hopelessly imprecise. Lafitte, Rhodes's enigmatic navigator, quietly surveyed the mist-shrouded waters. "That ship may truly be as enormous as they say," he mused, "but as long as it drifts within a certain range, I can still track it, even through all this fog." He offered Nethin a confident smile. Though the Devil's Triangle bristled with supernatural haze, Lafitte's uncanny instincts and secret methods gave him the edge. Moments later, Trafalgar joined them on deck, cradling his demon blade against his chest and staring out into the gloom. When they first entered these cursed waters, Nethin had laid out their mission. "Our next target is Gecko Moria of the Shichibukai. Knocking out another warlord will make a spectacular headline and burnish our reputation." Lafitte's eyes gleamed with restless excitement. Finally, a chance to put his skills to the test. Nethin atched him and couldn't help but grin. Had his crew been expecting anything less than a daring hunt? Robin stood a few paces from Nethin and offered him a gentle smile. "Even if you don't board the ship, once we reach the New World, the captain might still cross paths with Doflamingo." Nethin shook his head. "No, if it comes to that, I'd rather stay here and bear witness." He turned his gaze to the mist-shrouded sea. There was no trace of hesitation or fear in his eyes, only a fierce resolve. He would avenge Corazon and bring Doflamingo's reign of cruelty to an end, no matter the cost. Chapter 135, Terrifying Three-Masted Sail, Part 5. The Devil's Triangle lay cloaked in a thick, suffocating fog, its waters as dark as pitch. In that forbidding sea, the ghost shadow moved with uncanny ease. Its hull, painted in shades so black it seemed to absorb the gloom, cut through the haze like a phantom risen from the depths of hell. 7 days had passed since they'd entered this accursed stretch. During that time, the crew had drifted past one derelict wreck after another. Some were so ancient that their timbers had long since crumbled, leaving skeletal frames half submerged and decayed. "Something's coming," Lafitte called down from the crow's nest, his voice tense. He'd spent most of the voyage perched atop the mast, scanning the fog with sharp, restless eyes. Now he sprang to his feet, pointing eagerly toward the swirling mist. Nethin and Rhodes hurried out onto the deck, joining the others at the railing. Through the gray veil, a massive silhouette materialized. The ship was enormous and dreadfully old. Its hull was riddled with cracks, the wood eroded by wind and salt, and its once proud sails hung in tatters. Nethin frowned, shaking his head. "No, not this one." He tightened his grip on the rail. Whatever this ghostly ship was, it wasn't the dread three-masted terror the captain had described. Instead, it was something far older and far more mysterious, sliding toward them through the fog. Nethin's ship, the Black Ghost, was sizable, but in comparison to the looming terror bark, it felt almost toy-like. When the crew learned that the mighty terror bark was not their immediate destination, relief softened the lines on Luo, Shilu, and the others' faces. Still, the ghost drifted steadily toward the smaller wreck of a vessel moored alongside. Suddenly, a faint creak came from the decrepit hull, wood shifting, a ruined door scraping its frame. As the two ships drew level, a figure emerged from the broken doorway, a gleaming white skeleton perched atop a splintered bench, its empty eye sockets fixed on Nethin and the rest of the crew. A hollow laugh rattled through the air. Yo-ho! Yo-ho-ho! Silence fell on the Black Ghost. Lafitte, Robin, Luo, none flinched or cried out. Even Silu's hands stilled on the rail. Nethin stared at the grinning skeleton, expression unreadable. Then, in a blink, he vanished from the deck of the Ghost. On the wrecked ship, the skeleton's hollow laughter faded into a harsh screech, as if the bones themselves were protesting Nethin's arrival. A few tense minutes passed, every eye on the Ghost trained on the ruined hull. Then, as swiftly as he had left, Nethin reappeared at the stern of the broken vessel. He smoothed his sleeve, sprang into the air in a graceful arc, and landed lightly back on the Black Ghost's deck. Lafitte tipped his hat, a wry smile curving his lips. "Something interesting happened down there, Captain?" he asked. Nethin met his quartermaster's gaze and offered the barest of smiles. "You could say that." He paused, eyes lingering on the direction of the wreck. "But we haven't heard the last of our bony friend." Nethin shook his head. "No, I only asked a few questions of an old skeleton who's been around for decades. Now let's keep sailing." Luo, Shilu, and the others exchanged glances, then drifted off toward the cabin one after another. Soon only Lafitte remained on deck. At first, the endless expanse of this sea had intrigued him, but after a few days, even before they reached their current latitude, his curiosity waned and boredom settled in. 5 more days slipped by almost unnoticed. On this particular morning, Lafitte was leaning against the mainmast, idly scanning the horizon, when his keen ears picked up a faint murmur of water against wood. He squinted through the mist and stiffened. There, half shrouded by fog, loomed a colossal black shape, far larger than the derelict hulks they'd encountered before, more like an island than a ship. Yet it moved, cutting through the waves. A supergiant vessel, its 3 towering masts and broad hull dwarfing anything Lafitte had ever seen. A low laugh escaped him. He dropped his casual lean, straightened with sudden excitement, and the tedium vanished from his face. A smirk curled at his lips as he rushed below decks to rouse Nethin, Robin, and the rest. Above him, the phantom silhouette drew inexorably closer. The ghost shadow was coming into view at last. The moonlight glinted off rolling waves as the 3-masted ship drifted toward the castle's dock. Its entrance yawned like a monstrous human mouth, flanked by crumbling ramparts buried in mist. The entire scene felt suffocating, part ship, part shrine to some long-forgotten terror. Lafitte drew in a steady breath, studied that gaping portal, then glanced back at Nethin. "We're really going in there?" Nethin gave a calm nod. He'd weighed their odds already. Gecko Moria's power ranked near the bottom tier of the Ghost Sea's elite, yet his Thousand Shadows punch, capable of smashing half an island, was as clumsy as it was devastating, often leaving him unconscious after a single blow. By contrast, Donkuso Doflamingo, born a celestial dragon, wielded ancient secrets and commanded an empire of underworld informants. Against that, raw brawn would never be enough. Lafitte shrugged, eyes gleaming. "All right, Captain." Nethin steered the ghost shadow into the cavernous hold. The door sealed behind them with a muted click, as though the ship itself had swallowed them whole. Minutes later, the vessel's lanterns bobbed alongside the shore. The deck settled with a soft thud as they docked. Nethin called backward. "Shilu, stay here and keep watch over the ghost shadow. Don't let anyone near her." Shilu gave a sharp salute. Nethin exhaled, tightened his coat collar, and stepped off the gangplank into the castle's fog-choked courtyard, into whatever lay waiting beyond that yawning mouth of wood and iron. Nethin dropped onto the rocky shore and barked up to Siru. "Keep the Everlight anchored. No one leaves until we return." Of all his crew, only Siru and Lafitte matched his air of authority, though Lafitte's eyes shone brightest with anticipation. It was obvious she yearned to witness whatever Moonlight Moria had in store. Siru remained aboard to guard the ship. Luo, unaccustomed to such a grim landscape, gave a reluctant nod. "Let's see exactly how Moonlight Moria works," he murmured. At that, Lafitte and Robin joined them on land. With a faint, confident smile, Nethin folded his arms behind his back and led the way toward the looming, brooding castle ahead. As they pressed deeper into the forest, the trees grew gnarled and unnatural, their trunks twisting like tortured limbs. Tombstones, some cracked, some moss-covered, dotted the undergrowth, while open graves yawned in the gloom. Nithin's face was unreadable. Lafitte's grin widened with excitement. Robin's gaze darted from one eerie detail to the next, and even steady Luo swallowed hard. Then a sudden rustling cut through the heavy stillness. Before any of them could react, the earth split with a crack. Tombs disgorged bandaged skeletons and shambling zombies, all snapping skeletal jaws and clawing at the air. Moria's voice drifted across the moonlit graves, issuing a low, almost playful ho-ho. Rhodes, Robin, Luo, and Lafitte exchanged silent glances, their expressions unreadable. Then, without warning, boom, 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 the cemetery erupted in chaos. Screams echoed between cracked headstones as zombie heads were blasted skyward, some somehow reattaching to random corpses, while the maddened undead tore at one another with teeth and claws. Shrieks of terror and the stench of upturned soil filled the air. From the edge of the upheaval, Nithin, Luo, Rhodes, Robin, and Lafitte emerged unscathed, their faces impassive. Above them, the silhouette of Moria's distant castle shimmered through the swirling mist, beckoning. Robin pressed a hand to his mouth, stifling a smile. "I have to admit, Moria is fascinating." "You're the only one who thinks so," Luo drawled, shouldering his demon-forged blade. He tilted his head and smirked under half-lowered lids. Lafitte clicked his ebony cane against the cracked pavement, eyes glinting. "Raising and commanding the dead, an extraordinary talent." He paused mid-swing, a faint frown creasing his brow. "Wait." Every footstep froze. Even the slowest to react, Luo, halted when he saw Nethin's rigid posture. Their eyes darted through the misty gloom, ears straining for the source of that sudden stillness. Somewhere beyond the shattered tombs, something, or someone, was watching, and now it had finally made itself known. Nico Robin stood rigid in the dim corridor just outside the bathhouse. Her gaze was fixed straight ahead, but every few seconds her eyes flicked anxiously to the left. Then, almost imperceptibly, her arms rose and trembled as if she'd sensed something looming behind her. A quiet voice drifted from the shadows. "What are you up to, Mr. Invisible?" In the next instant, a dozen or more translucent hands materialized in midair, contorting and clawing at empty space mere inches from Robin's back. It was the unmistakable effect of Absalom's Sukasuke no Mi, his devil fruit power of invisibility. Nethin stepped forward, expression unruffled. With a subtle twist of his fingers, he activated his own light-bending technique. Normally he used it to cloak himself. Today, he reversed the effect, warping light to peel away the invisible cloak around Absalom. In Nethin's vision, the specter of ghostly hands snapped into focus, revealing Absalom's bewildered form hovering just behind Robin. "You'd think after all your training you'd be more careful," Nethin said with a faint, teasing edge. With a frustrated shout, Absalom's phantom limbs vanished in a ripple of air. The invisible man reappeared fully, pale, flustered, and glaring. His lips parted in a hiss of outrage. "I only came to have a little fun," Absalom spat, voice low and quivering. He stared at Nethin through narrowed eyes. "But how did you, Ghost Hand Rhodes?" Chapter 136, Invasion, First Update. "Don't pretend you're cut off from the world," Nethin said coolly, eyes locked on Absalom. "No carrier pigeon sailing the sea fog brought you news. The Marines on Moria have plenty of other ways to stay informed." He folded his hands behind his back. "Now tell me, where is Moria?" Absalom's gaze narrowed, his posture dignified but tense. He said nothing. In one swift motion, he bent his knees, activated his transparency ability, and melted into the shadows behind them. Nethin snorted, lifted his boot, and let it fall. The ground buckled like a blanket under his foot, surging upward in an instant. Absalom's invisible form slammed back first into the sudden mound of earth and stones, the debris crushing him into the mud with a thunderous crack. Before the shade could recover, Nithin extended his hand. The surrounding soil roared to life, spiraling inward until it snapped shut over Absalom's prone form, or sealing him in a hastily raised tomb of dirt and rock. A cold smile tugged at Nithin's mouth. He recalled how Absalom had used that invisibility once, slinking into Nami's bathhouse to spy. Even Nithin, master of light distortion himself, had never stooped to such a cowardly trick. He leaned closer to the mound. "Funny," he murmured, "you'd hide in the shadows for a peek at a woman's bath, but won't tell me a thing about Moria." With that, he turned away, leaving the earth to do its grim work. Nithin turned away from Absalom's body and pressed on toward the distant fortress. The horror bark loomed before them, a ship so vast it was said to be an island unto itself, bristling with multiple castles along its decks. As they ventured deeper into its bowels, the corridor branched into 3 paths, each promising a different stronghold. Nithin paused, rubbing his temple as he tried to reconstruct the ship's layout in his mind. Memories of the 3-masted monstrosity were hazy, so hazy that no clear map emerged. He finally made his choice by sight. The middle road led to the largest castle, so that was the one he'd follow. To his right, Lafitte let out a low, whimsical chuckle and tapped the brim of his top hat. "Then I'll take this path," he declared, striding off down the right fork. On the left, Luo moved with quiet purpose, demon sword slung across his back, vanishing into the shadows without a word. And so the trio split, Nithin down the central rampart, Lafitte to the right, and Luo to the left, each setting out on his own perilous course through the bowels of the horror bark. Robin hesitated for a moment, her hand poised between 2 choices. Then a deep, unfamiliar voice rumbled behind her. From the shadows strode a massive, 3-headed hellhound, each maw lined with jagged teeth and each head gleaming with infernal light. The creature paused, cocked one snarling head, and for a heartbeat just stared at her. Robin's surprise shifted to delight. "Wow, you're actually kind of cute," she said, blinking. She'd always had a soft spot for the grotesquely adorable, an odd taste that her friends Luo and Nithin teased her about mercilessly. Too bad neither of them was here now to witness her reaction. Deep within Central Castle, in a candlelit bedchamber lined with obsidian pillars, Moonlight Moria, one of the king's dreaded 7 warlords, lay atop an enormous gold-trimmed canopy bed. Even his nightmares seemed lavish, but just then he bolted upright, beads of sweat glistening on his brow. "Uff, just a dream," he groaned, rubbing his temple. Before he could settle back, the heavy oak door swung open. A bandaged zombie, its face hidden in wrappings, stepped in and bowed low. Behind it trailed 2 armored guards, tense and alert. "Lord Moria," the zombie said in a hollow voice, "it's been 3 days since your last attack, time you spent resting. We have kept your meals warm and your supplies at hand. And now, our new prey is more dangerous than ever." He paused, steepling his fingers. "They are the Ghost Hand Pirates, the very crew who shattered the Navy's forces at Spring Island. If you can capture their shadows, it will greatly enhance your strength." Moria's eyes gleamed. "Excellent. Prepare the warships. I want them brought to me alive." He swung his legs over the side of the bed, the fat folds of his robe rustling like sails. "Let the hunt begin. The Thriller Bark pirates carry the highest bounties we've seen so far. At the top stands Ghost Hand, Roz himself, wanted for 440 million belly. Even before assuming his title as Lord of Thriller Bark, Moria was already a 320 million belly fugitive. He once ventured into the New World and dared to challenge Kaido, one of the 4 emperors. No matter how tough the Ghost Hand pirates think they are, can any of them truly hope to match Kaido? Of course not. These are Kaido's waters, his territory. All they can dream of is making a name for themselves. Some of Moria's zombie underlings whispered among themselves. "He's the man who killed Crocodile, and now he's shown up at our doorstep. What about Hogback and Absalom?" Moria's shadowed eyes narrowed. He'd been to the very heart of the New World, faced Kaido, and lived to tell the tale, while the rest of his crew paid the price. He felt nothing but contempt for anyone who wasn't one of the 4 emperors, not even his own Ghost Hand pirates. "Absalom has already been sent out," he said coldly. "Now go, bring the 3 misfits to me at once." With that, the zombies dispersed, scuttling into the foggy woods of Thriller Bark to carry out their orders. Moria's cruel laughter echoed off the stone walls of West Castle's laboratory. "If we seize the very shadow of the Ghost Hand pirates," he purred, "my zombie army will grow immeasurably stronger, and I'll edge ever closer to the title of Pirate King Chi-He." Ha! Outside the throne-like dais, Hogbark, the grizzled engineer among Moria's trio of mad scientists, slipped from the lab, his latex gloves stained with fresh blood. He peeled them off and discarded them on a nearby bench. As he rubbed his hands, a lone zombie shuffled through the doorway, bowing its hollow-eyed head. "Master Hogbark," it stammered. "Lord Moria summons you." Hogbark groaned. "Really? I've just stepped out of the lab. I haven't even had my pudding yet." He shook his head but headed for the door. Then, abruptly, a screech tore through the corridor ahead, like metal grinding on stone, followed by the thunderous clash of something forcing its way in. Frowning, Hogbark pushed the heavy wooden door open. A panicked zombie stumbled toward him, its cracked voice trembling. "Lord Hogbark, someone's broken in. They're too strong. We can't hold them back." Hogbark's eyes narrowed. The break-in confirmed his suspicions about why Moria had urgently summoned them. Whatever was coming, it would change everything. Nithin crept forward, following the echo of shuffling footsteps. After slipping through a handful of narrow chambers, he entered a vast, shattered hall. The air reeked of blood and rot. Bookshelves lay splintered, murals peeled from the walls, and carpets, once richly woven, had been shredded to tatters. Shadowy shapes, twisted into horrid living creatures, had been sliced apart and left to bleed out in crude stitchwork. Standing amid the carnage was the man everyone whispered about, the so-called genius surgeon. Clutched in his hand was a gleaming demon-forged blade. His wild eyes settled on Nithin as he stepped into the room. "You must be Dr. Hogbark," Nithin said flatly, lifting the demon knife. In the pale light, it gleamed with an otherworldly sheen. Hogbark's grin split his face, revealing 4 jagged, animal-like fangs. He threw back his head and laughed, a chilling, hysterical note that echoed off the broken walls. "Indeed, I'm the world-famous Dr. Bartholomew Hogbark, at your service." Nithin's gaze never wavered. With a swift motion, he flicked the knife across the nearest corpse, a reanimated corpse stitched together with crude sutures and oozing black ichor. It slumped to the floor in 2 halves. "These abominations," Nithin said quietly, "are your masked earpieces?" He motioned toward the corpses littering the hall, their torn flesh crudely repaired with thick, mismatched thread. "The cuts are all beside the point. A butcher's work, not a surgeon's." For a moment, pride lit Hogbark's eyes, and he began to speak. "Of course, my experiments are." Nithin cut him off coldly. "Your work is a failure." His tone was like ice. "Monstrosities stitched together, hardly the breakthroughs you promised the Academy." Hogbark's chest heaved. His smug, superior smile froze on his lips, then melted into gloom as he stared at the bloody proof of his so-called genius strewn across the floor. Nithin's eyes went cold as he stared down Luo. "What did you say?" he snarled. Luo didn't budge. He shrugged the demon knife onto his shoulder and regarded Nithin with easy calm. "I said your methods are rotten," he replied. "Stitching, splicing, reanimating, frankly, it doesn't matter. Oh, and by the way, I'm a doctor, too." Nithin's pride flared. Thanks to the Operation Fruit, his Frankenstein creations, those stitched-together zombies, were feared throughout the Grand Line. The idea that anyone could trivialize them galled him beyond measure. He ground his teeth and hissed, "You shrill-tongued brat! You dare lecture me on medical skill? You're 10 years too early to criticize my craft." With a roar that shook the rafters, Nithin unleashed his army of the undead. Dozens of grotesque figures, their joints creaking and eyes hollow, surged forward into the dimly lit chamber. Unfazed, Luo lifted his blade, Ghost Cry, its jagged edge glowing faintly in the gloom. Planting his feet firmly, he met the onrushing horde with the same cool precision he reserved for the operating table. In that instant, the 2 doctors, one master of flesh and sinew, the other wielder of a cursed knife, prepared to clash amid a storm of ravenous corpses. Chapter 137, Hunting Mariah, Part 2. Night had fallen over the East Castle when Lafitte slipped through its outer defenses. His cloaking technique was flawless, so flawless, in fact, that even the battlement's guards didn't suspect a thing. Unfortunately for him, Perona, one of Mariah's ghostly lieutenants, had a knack for detecting intruders behind walls. A chill wind of negative energy swept through the stones and struck Lafitte squarely in the chest. Rather than curse his luck, Lafitte simply smiled as he rose to his feet. The first spectral assault fizzled uselessly against his calm demeanor. He pivoted on one heel, letting Perona's other hollows fly past him harmlessly, then melted into the shadowy corridors beyond. In East Castle, a game of hide-and-seek had just begun, and victory was already his. Outside, Robin found himself surrounded by a throng of shambling corpses. The zombies pressed in from all sides, moaning in unison, eager to tear him apart. Yet Robin, armed with his honed devil fruit power and an unshakable confidence, didn't even break a sweat. He moved like a one-man army, his strikes precise and unstoppable. In moments, the horde lay in twisted heaps at his feet, their lifeless forms a testament to his prowess. Meanwhile, at the summit of Central Castle, Dr. Mariah grew restless. He had summoned his 3 eerie subordinates to this very chamber, but not one of them had arrived. Impatience gnawed at him, yet he anticipated someone else even more eagerly, the captain of the Ghost Hand Pirates, known across the seas as Ghost Hand Nethin. A thick veil of darkness draped itself over the main gate. Then, from the oppressive blackness, a figure emerged. Clad in the signature long coat of the Ghost Hand Pirates, Nethin's presence was as commanding as it was silent. His eyes, sharp and unreadable, fixed on the citadel before him. Here, under Mariah's watchful eye, the final move would soon be made. Nethin didn't pause at the closed doors. He pressed his palm against the great oak portals without hesitation. In an instant, his distortion power flared to life. The wood and metal around his hand warped into a spinning vortex, splintering outward with a thunderous boom. The doors exploded inward, showering the entrance hall with shards of timber. He stepped through the rubble into the vast chamber beyond. A handful of zombies, dangling limbs and vacant eyes, recoiled in stunned terror. Nethin's voice cut through the silence. "Where is Moria?" The creatures exchanged wild, animalistic glances and let out an unearthly shriek before scattering in 3 directions. But they never made it far. The floor itself seemed to wake at his command, rippling upward like a tidal wave of stone. In moments, each zombie was swallowed by the rolling slabs, only to be squeezed into a grisly tangle of shredded bandages and broken bones. Nethin strode past the grim remains and paused in the center of the hall. He looked up, eyes narrowing. High above, atop the castle's tallest turret, a strange, pulsing aura glowed against the night sky, an unmistakable beacon that promised both answers and danger. Moonlight Mariah was halfway through her pudding at the dining table when a thunderous roar rattled the castle walls. Pudding splattered across her forehead. Stunned and furious, he swiped at the mess, stood so fast the chair clattered behind him, and bellowed into the corridors. His roar echoed through the halls and brought several skeletal zombies skittering in, wide-eyed and panicked. "My Lord Mariah, it's..." the foremost zombie gasped, bowing frantically. "Someone's broken in, the captain of the Ghost Hand Pirates." Before Mariah could demand more, another deafening roar thundered up from the lowest levels. The entire castle shuddered, as if the foundations themselves were being torn apart. Mariah's eyes narrowed, veined red with anger. "Show yourself," he snarled, racing for the stairwell. Suddenly, the top floor lurched once, then collapsed in on itself. A peculiar, twisting force seized the castle, warping its stones as if the building were made of rubber. Upper and lower halls dragged past each other, walls creaking and groaning as they bent in the center. Boom! Sections of battlement toppled, sending dust and rubble cascading into the rotunda below. Mariah skidded to a halt on the dizzying slope of cracked marble, heart hammering. The invader's power was unlike anything he'd ever felt, and it was tearing his stronghold apart. He steadied himself, raised a ghostly hand, and summoned a blade of dark energy. "If the Ghost Hand Captain wants to fight," he growled, "then he's found me." The moment Nethin spoke, a deafening roar shook the ground. Moria's castle shuddered, then collapsed in an avalanche of stone and rubble. Dust and debris exploded outward, and through the chaos, Nethin hovered calmly in midair, arms folded behind his back. Hogback, who had been barking orders to his zombie legions, froze, eyes widening as he stared at the ruins of the fortress he'd built. Nearby, Perona shrieked and clung to Lafitte, her bravado from their hide-and-seek match completely gone. "Impossible! Moria's castle," Hogback whispered, stunned. Before he could react, Nethin's blade traced a brilliant arc of light through the swirling dust. Over a dozen zombies erupted into chunks of flesh and bone. Though immortally cursed, these shambling corpses couldn't withstand Nethin's cutting power. With a casual flick of his finger, the severed pieces coalesced into a grotesque, unmoving mass, a zombie ball, that oozed and dropped to the shattered courtyard below. When the last of the undead stilled, Nethin drifted down to solid ground and fixed Hogback with an indifferent gaze. "Your reign ends here," he said quietly, "and the title of genius surgeon will belong to me." A sudden flutter of dark shapes overhead made everyone look up. From the castle's smoking rubble, hundreds of black shadows burst forth like a swarm of bats, tearing through the air and kicking up clouds of gravel. From the heart of the ruins stepped Moria himself, cloak torn and forehead trickling with blood. He staggered into the open, eyes blazing with shock and fury, but for the moment he could only stare at Nethin's unruffled figure. Nethin stood amid the ruins of his fallen fortress, his fists clenching so hard his knuckles turned white. Every muscle in his face twitched with barely contained fury as he stared up at Moria, who hovered serenely in the sky. "You dared to destroy my castle? You'll pay for this," he snarled. His voice echoed against the shattered walls. Raising his arm, he called upon his shadow power. Dozens of bat-winged forms swirled around him, each one coalescing into a single jet-black spear. He hurled it upward in a deadly thrust. Moria's crimson eyes narrowed as the shadow-horned spear flew toward her like a bolt of night. But Nethin was ready. In the barest instant, he pressed a foot to the air and unleashed a distortion of space. With a thunderous crack, the dark spear bent under the pressure, like iron forced against an unbreakable wall, and shattered into fragments of writhing shadow. Before the falling shards had even touched the ground, Nethin had vanished from his place on the ramparts. In the blink of an eye, he reappeared high above the debris and executed Moonstep, a graceful, arcsing descent that left him streaking toward Moria like a falling star. Moria's eyes widened in surprise. She had expected to fend off the spear with her own magic, not see it broken by his sheer physical force. And now he was coming straight for her, every inch the vengeful warrior, ready to finish what he had started. Nethin's heart pounded at the sight of the gun, an all-too-familiar reminder of how utterly helpless he'd felt under Kaido's beasts. In that instant, he caught a flicker of fear in Moria's eyes. She ground her teeth, sneered, and vanished in a swirl of inky mist, only to reappear as a perfect shadow clone beside her. "Shadow warrior," she hissed. Without hesitation, the replica lunged at Nethin, fists flying in rapid succession. Nethin's rope, arm shot out, meeting the dark figure with a solid punch. The clone shattered into a swarm of black bats that scattered through the air like living smoke. Not a muscle twitched on Nethin's face. He had already pinpointed Moria's true position and leapt toward her before the bats even realized they'd been dispatched. Moria's eyes narrowed to slits. "Flying bats! Shadow mage!" she cried. From every shadow, dozens more bats erupted, wings beating in eerie unison. At the same time, another shadow-born doppelganger surged forward, claws outstretched. Nethin braced himself and charged headlong into the cloud of winged horror. Dark energy coiled around him, but he pushed through it. One by one, the bats struck his body, and each time they did, they screeched before disintegrating into nothingness. Even the second clone couldn't withstand his resolve. As the last wisp of shadow collapsed, Nethin stood alone, unshaken and unstoppable. Chapter 138, Disintegration, Part 3. How is this possible? Moria's eyes went cold as dread surged through him. Nethin's assault was strikingly reminiscent of Kaido's. Every blow carried that same bone-shattering force, but it was leagues more brutal. A bead of sweat traced down Moria's temple as memories of the former Beast Pirate Emperor thundered in his mind. No, Nethin wasn't Kaido reborn. He was something far worse. Desperation drove Moria to his shadow power. He formed the seals, but he could sustain only 2 shadow clones at a time, and each time one was destroyed, he was left nearly helpless while it regenerated. Heart-pounding, he steeled himself and unleashed his ultimate technique, Shadow Convergence. Instantly, countless tendrils of pure darkness lunged toward him, swirling into a furious vortex. At its center, Moria felt the shadows peel into his being, fusing with his flesh. Agony and power mingled as he let the maelstrom consume him. His ruined form, already more than 6 meters tall in its shadow giant state, stretched higher. 7 meters, 8, 9. When the whirlwind finally died down, Moria stood reborn as an immense figure of living shadows. He towered over the battlefield, every inch of him a testament to his darkest art. Yet even this colossal form brought him no comfort, for across from him, Nethin's eyes burned with an inhuman promise. There was no denying it. This was nothing like the Kaido Moria once feared. This was something altogether more terrifying, and Moria was nowhere near prepared. Moria, her body swollen with the hundreds of shadows she'd devoured, let out a thunderous roar and lunged at Nethin, swinging a punch charged with terrifying force. It struck like an avalanche. One blow could have toppled a fortress. But Nethin didn't meet her head-on. With a graceful twist in midair, he let her fist pass harmlessly by, then dropped lightly to the ground right in front of her. "Clumsy technique," he observed coolly. "Clumsy execution. I heard you even dared to challenge Kaido of the Beasts. I wonder, how did you manage that?" His eyes were as cold and still as steel. Fingers folding into a tight fist, he blurred forward and struck Moria squarely between chest and abdomen. Had Moria herself been capable of mastering such raw power, wielding it with precision, she might have been a rival to the Three Calamities, if not Kaido himself. But this strength was borrowed. It flowed from her subordinate's shadows, not from her own will. She lacked the subtle control to sustain it on her own. Boom! Nethin's comparatively slight fist slammed into her massive torso. Moria's body writhed and contorted, as though a speeding locomotive had crashed into her chest. Her roar cut off in a strangled gasp, her great frame buckling under the impact. Nethin's fist slammed into Moria's midsection with a twisting, vortex-like force. Moria's eyes rolled back, and a torrent of shadows burst from his mouth. He'd clearly grown tougher, his stamina was off the charts, but that blow still staggered him. Not willing to let him recover, Nethin drifted forward, expression unreadable, and delivered a swift backhand strike. Speed and power fused seamlessly in that blow. If he could marshal this strength and endurance at will, he'd be nearly invincible. Unfortunately, this surge wasn't truly his own, and he had no real control over it. Under Nethin's second punch, Moria was sent hurtling through crumbling ruins. He smashed through walls and tumbled to the rubble-strewn ground, coughing and sputtering shards of stone. With trembling arms, he forced himself upright, disbelief blazing in his pale eyes. He'd drawn upon the shadow convergence, yet it had offered him no real defense, just as it had centuries ago. High above him, Nethin hovered like a specter. Moria's fractured memories swirled in his mind, but one thought cut through the chaos. "Phantom Fist, Nethin, you!" he gasped, voice trailing off into the dust. Nethin hovered in midair amid the crumbling ruins, arms crossed, watching Moria struggle on the struggling, racked stone floor. "If you're brave enough," he called down to her, voice cold, "go find the real nightmare." Moria's chest heaved. With a final agonized effort, she wrenched free the dark projection that had bound Nethin to Kaido's shadow, then collapsed, bleeding, into the rubble. A twisted grin spread across her face. "Nightmare? You mean Kaido the White Beast?" she rasped. Nethin drifted down until he floated inches above her. "Too bad you'll never live to see me beat him," he replied evenly. Suddenly, a soft chime sounded in Nethin's earpiece. System notice. Hunt completed. King's Apparition C. Moonlight. Moria defeated. Reward, plus 50 talent proficiency points, plus 1 free talent point. Nethin flicked his gaze upward, then shrugged. So the King's Apparition C's qualified as a hunt in the talent system too, and that extra free point was probably just a bonus. He dismissed the alert, landed lightly on the ground, and took a moment to survey the ruined island before turning away. About 30 seconds later, a lone figure emerged from the shadows and approached Moria's still form. He knelt, plucked a small phone bug device from his pocket, and blew out a frosty breath. "Moria's dead," he reported into the concealed transmitter. Silence crackled at the other end for a heartbeat, then an irritated voice snapped through. "He did it again?" Reports came in one after another from Wangxia and Chiwuhai. "No mercy," a calm voice snarled through the hidden bug on the comm unit. "Since he fell to the Ghost Hand pirates, Moria has proven unfit to lead Chiwuhai. He's stripped of his rank. While you're there, wipe out that pirate band. Don't let them keep terrorizing the seas." An equally measured reply followed. "Understood." Nethan stood motionless before Moria's corpse. Without a word, he stowed the bug, let out a slow breath, and turned away. Frost instantly bloomed along the crumbling walls in his wake, sending shards of ice spidering across broken masonry, and a biting chill crept into the air. Aboard the horror bark, the central keep lay in smoldering ruins. Nithan emerged from the shattered west gate, the demon blade in his hand still slick with blood. Though ordinary zombies posed no real challenge to someone of his skill, the skirmish had nevertheless drained nearly every ounce of his strength. Youth and inexperience offered no shield against exhaustion. He paused at the edge of the courtyard, every muscle aching, proof that even a sharp blade and a resolute will come at a cost. Inside the eastern wing of Moria's castle, torchlight flickered across damp stone corridors as the ghost hand pirates pressed their assault. Without warning, Perona let out a startled shriek and found herself hurled into a blood-red gift box propped on a cold slab. She'd barely registered the insult when her head popped up like a twisted jack-in-the-box, green slime bubbling at her lips before her eyes rolled back and she collapsed in a faint. From the shadows, Lafitte emerged, moving with the silent grace of a stalking panther. Around them, the air quivered with the moans of Moria's zombies. They surged forward in a half-living stampede, but Nico Robin was already there to meet them. Her long, slender arms snaked through the mass, ripping distorted limbs from bark-hard torsos. Robin, who normally recoiled at the sight of blood, seemed oddly unfazed. These abominations oozed neither flesh nor gore, and she dismantled their mockeries of life with a cold, almost clinical precision. Not long ago, Gecko Moria's undead horde had appeared unstoppable. Then Kaido's monstrous beasts turned on their former master, shattering his army from within. Seizing the moment, a lean young strategist named Nithan led the ghost hand pirates through the ruined defenses. They moved like phantoms, slipping past shattered gates and ravaged battlements, cutting down resistance with lightning-fast strikes and unwavering coordination. Now, as the last zombie collapsed into a splintered heap, Nethan stepped into the torchlit chamber. His dark eyes swept over the carnage, noting Perona's prone form in the crimson box, and Lafitte's motionless silhouette by the wall. Torchlight danced across his determined features, revealing a captain who thrived on turning chaos into opportunity. With Moria's undead empire in ruins, the downfall was complete, not by brute force, but by the cunning blend of strategy, timing, and ruthless efficiency that had become Nethan's trademark. Chapter 139, Encounter, Youthful, Part 4. Rhodes stepped into the old three-way junction and surveyed the aftermath. The monstrous zombified tree lay splintered across the ground, and the hell-forged three-headed hound had been reduced to ash. Luo Dao stood opposite him, clutching a wicked demon blade, tears streaking his dirt-smudged cheeks. "Is it done?" Rhodes asked. Luo nodded, voice quavering. "I took out that so-called doctor. He never stood a chance. Where's Lafitte?" Rhodes glanced down the empty path. If Luo had tangled with Hogback, then Lafitte should have crossed paths with Perona, and he'd be back first. At that moment, Lafitte emerged from the shadows, a dark cloak flickering into his hand as if pulled from thin air. He approached with a mischievous smile. "Captain," he said, flinging the cloak open, "I think you'll find this intriguing." Under the fabric lay two neatly wrapped gift boxes, one large, one small. Bound inside each was Princess Mononoke Perona, her eyes wide with horror as she struggled against her ropes. For a heartbeat, Rhodes said nothing. Robin's gaze sharpened, suspicion dancing in her dark eyes. Luo tilted his head, studying the scene with cool indifference. Nithan drew in a slow breath and rubbed his forehead. He let a thoughtful smile tug at his lips. The power of the ghost fruit, this could be very useful. "Since you've caught her, bring her along," Lafitte said with a faint smile. Nethan tipped the brim of his hat, Nico Robin lowered her eyes, and the rest of the crew tightened their grips on the ropes. Perona, though freed from the cabin, was still bound at the wrists and could only let out soft, frightened whimpers. They moved toward the shore, but just as they were about to disembark, everyone's feet froze in place. Perona, tears welling in her eyes, almost stumbled into Nethan before she realized something was very wrong, and her whimper cut off mid-sigh. Ahead of them, where the sea should have lapped gently against the ghost shadow's hull, lay a flawless sculpture of ice. Every plank and curve of the ship gleamed like crystal in the pale light, and atop the ice-bound railing sat a solitary figure in full marine uniform, legs crossed at the ankle, radiating an uncanny stillness. Fleet Admiral Kuzan, known to many as the fearsome ice hero, rested his gloved hands on his knees. His expression was calm, almost benign, belying the chill of authority that swept over the deck. Not a muscle in his face twitched as he spoke in a soft, deliberate voice. "Well now, Lafitte," he began, inclining his head in mock courtesy, "it's been years. Look how much you've grown. And you too, Nico Robin. I'm sorry, but I can't let this voyage continue." A heavy silence fell. No one aboard the Ghost Shadow could mistake the gravity of his words or the power he wielded. The Admiral sat unmoving, the brilliant ice beneath him reflecting every tense face on deck, as if sealing their fate in a gallery of frozen moments. Kaku and the others had already fed them every scrap of intelligence on the Navy's three great admirals, but nothing could have prepared them for this. The frozen sea at their bow rippled and reformed, coalescing into an immense ice sculpture of the Ghost Shadow. The brutal, frozen figure banished the eerie hush that had settled over the three-masted ship, replacing it with a chill more terrifying than any phantom whisper. Robin's forehead beaded with cold sweat. She'd feared no one more than Admiral Aokiji ever since their first dreadful encounter in her youth. Now his icy stare swept over the deck, and she felt that old terror knot her stomach. Luoi's face went deathly pale, his pupils shrank to pinpoint slits. Despite his years, he understood all too well what an admiral's presence meant: inexorable power and merciless judgment. Even Lafitte struggled to remain outwardly calm. His posture was impeccable, but the faint tremor in his eyes betrayed how deeply he, too, felt the weight of Aokiji's arrival. And Nethan, he hadn't dared hope for a warning, let alone that Aokiji would materialize aboard this notorious vessel. Heart-hammering, he realized there was no room to maneuver, no secret road of escape. In that moment, every soul on deck grasped the same truth. Against an admiral of the Navy, none could stand unshaken. Nethan wasn't a straw hat Luffy. He had no Monkey D. Garp as a grandfather, no royal favors from Alabasta, and certainly no soft spot from the Navy that hunted him. In fact, he'd made it his business to return every insult, every cannon blast, every interrogation with equal and often greater force. No matter which admiral he crossed, it ended in blood and ruin. Admiral Kizaru might toy with him for minutes at a time, quipping about the speed of light and the futility of resistance, even as he prepared his next strike. Admiral Akainu, on the other hand, needed no words. As soon as their gazes met, magma roared from his fists, and the fight was on. Then there was Admiral Chingji, calm, precise, and infinitely more dangerous than either of them. Tonight, aboard the flagship Victory's hold, Nethan was certain Chingji wouldn't attack first. He was right. She sat across from him in the dimly lit chamber, her coat draped over the back of her chair. With a single, deliberate motion, she reached out, tipped his chin, and met his eyes. "I know everything about you, Captain Nethan," she said quietly. "We discovered several moles within the Navy, lapses in security that are entirely our fault. I apologize for the confusion and the lives that were risked because of our mistakes." She paused, letting the weight of her words settle between them. Then her expression darkened. "But your actions since, burning ports, assassinating officers, betraying every principle we stand for, those are yours alone. No apology can erase them. As a man, you must understand there is always a price to pay, and you will pay it." Silence fell. The Ghost Hand pirates were feared across the seas for their ruthlessness, and Nethan, their most notorious captain, felt the full force of Chingji's calm condemnation. He didn't flinch. He knew this was only the first move in a far deadlier game. Nethan weighed the consequences of letting this go. He knew better than anyone that real justice was his to dispense, and by now he'd already crossed a line. He met Chingji's steady gaze, his voice calm as he chose his words. "There's no point in lies," he said. "In the jungle, power makes the law. If I'd been the one pulling the strings, none of this would ever have happened. Since it's unavoidable now, fear and panic are useless, and they have no place in me." A brief shudder ran through him at the thought of losing control. Chingji held Nethan's stare without flinching. Yes, Nethan had made his name hunting pirates and securing peace, but slaughtering naval officers was an unpardonable crime. No amount of good would wipe that away. There is no loophole in justice, Qingji replied quietly. A single good deed cannot erase a grave wrongdoing. He fell silent, then turned to Robin, who stood at his side. Nicole Robin, he said, when I released you, I warned you we would be enemies. I told you, the moment you slipped up, I'd be the first to bring you in. Unfortunately for you, you chose the wrong path. When Robin heard Nethin's words, she clenched her teeth. Memories of her childhood flooded back, and a cold fury settled in her chest. You're saying Ohara was destroyed because someone made a mistake? She spat. Nethin paused, the briefest flicker of doubt crossing his face. Even as a Navy admiral, he'd long questioned the world government's brand of justice. He wasn't blindly loyal like Sengoku, nor was he an unbending zealot like Akainu. He'd seen too many dark secrets hidden by the Marines, and too many innocent people sacrificed to cover them up, to believe without reservation that the world government stood for true justice. Yet he was newly promoted to admiral. He hadn't yet grown jaded enough to abandon all faith in the system, nor so disillusioned that he'd thrown his own principles to the wind. Taking a spall, teddying breath, he met Robin's glare with calm resolve. Defying a direct government order is a mistake, nothing more, nothing less, he said softly. That's the law, and laws are meant to be upheld. Robin bristled at his restraint, but Nethin's quiet certainty left no room for argument. He had chosen his path, and for now, he would stand by the Navy's code, however flawed it might be. Qingji rose to his feet, frost creeping up one side of his body in shimmering veins. He glanced down at Nethin and the others with icy detachment. You've caused enough trouble, he said flatly. Let's finish this now. Chapter 140, Ice Age, Part 5. Click, click. In the void before Admiral Qingji, countless ice spears suddenly coalesced, shattering space itself as they lunged toward Nethin, Lafitte, Luo, and the rest. Alerted at the last moment, they scattered in unison. Luo was the slowest. He drew in a sharp breath, yanked free his demon sword, and bellowed, "Even if you're a Navy admiral, I won't go down here. I still have a mission to complete." But by the time his blade whistled through the air, Nethin and Lafitte were already in motion. Nethin slipped past the nearest ice javelin and, in a blur, vaulted onto Qingji's shoulders. The admiral's face remained unreadable as he lifted a fist to crush his assailant. At that moment, spectral arms, summoned by Lafitte, erupted around Qingji's torso, wrapping him in unbreakable bonds. Silently, Lafitte materialized at Qingji's back. His polished mahogany cane plunged forward, tearing through the admiral's chest with a bone-shattering crack. Bang! Before Qingji could recover, Nethin's punch thundered into the admiral's side, driving him to the brink of defeat. The ice spears flickered out, and for a heartbeat the chamber fell into stunned silence. Blood trickled from the corner of Qingji's lips as he stared in disbelief at his two attackers. Nethin steadied himself, eyes locked on the fallen admiral. "It's over," he declared quietly, though neither he nor Lafitte relaxed their guard. They both knew that in this place of frozen voids, danger was never truly gone. Lafitte drew back his wooden staff and fell into a defensive stance, while Nico Robin sprouted her extra arms to reinforce the barrier around him. Caught between the spiraling push of staff and limbs, Qingji's body shattered in an instant, cracking into thousands of jagged ice fragments that clattered down onto the frozen sea below. But barely a heartbeat later, those shards began snapping back together, click, click, until Qingji stood whole and unharmed, as if nothing had happened. Nethin's heart froze. He'd thrown everything into that punch, full strength, conqueror's hockey unleashed without restraint, and still he hadn't even broken Qingji's skin. How had he anticipated the blow? Used his own domineering aura to neutralize it? Before Nethin could find an answer, Qingji blurred at the edges and vanished, leaving only a faint mist of ice particles hanging in the air. In that split second, Nethin's mind raced back to the few times he'd actually glimpsed Qingji's true speed, most memorably when Doflamingo's finger was already dropping to finish off Smoker, only to be frozen solid in midair. There was no denying it now. Qingji moved faster than the eye could follow. Although Qingji wasn't as fast as Admiral Kizaru, he still ranked among the sea's elite, far beyond anyone present, Rhodes included. In the blink of an eye, he materialized behind Lafitte. Even Nethin's steely gaze could only register a fleeting blur. Whoa! Kingji's palm slammed into Lafitte's back. Lafitte's eyes went wide. Muttering an incantation, he shattered into a swirl of cherry blossoms, then reformed beside Robin. He gasped, a frost-white bruise the size of a hand marring his spine, clear evidence that even he hadn't dodged entirely. Without pausing, Qingji struck again. He rocketed toward Robin, his arm transforming into a jagged ice blade aimed at her throat. "Ice slaughter!" he roared. At that moment, Luo, who'd been too stunned to react, snapped to attention. "Now!" he shouted, channeling his power to swap Robin and Nethin in an instant. Nethin landed squarely in the blade's path. He braced himself, tightened his fist, and drove it into the ice with a deafening crash. Boom! The force shattered the blade, sending shards scattering like glass across the deck. The ice blade slammed into Nethin's twisting fist. For a tense half-second, a spiderweb of cracks crawled across the blade before it shattered with a reverberating crash. Qingji didn't flinch. His voice was cool as he intoned, "Ice Age." A deep hum rolled out. In an instant, jagged frost erupted from beneath Qingji's feet, shooting outward in every direction so swiftly that Nethin's twisting power could barely hold it back. Despite his best efforts, Luo, Lafitte, and Robin, standing too close, were caught in the surge and frozen solid in seconds. Nethin snorted. "Distortion! Sonic boom!" He channeled the warping energy of his power into his voice, unleashing a deafening screech that pierced Qingji's ears. Caught off guard, Qingji staggered, clutching his head as a ringing roar filled his senses. Seizing the moment, Nethin darted forward and unleashed a crushing straight punch. The impact sent Qingji's ice form exploding into a flurry of shards that scattered across the ground. Moments later, the fragments lifted and reassembled into a standing figure. Qingji wiped a trickle of blood from the corner of his mouth, a faint, knowing smile tugging at his lips. "I was careless. I never saw that coming." Nethin's glare bore into Qingji as he clenched his fists. He'd timed his punch perfectly, channeling a sonic boom to catch her off guard. Against anyone else, that full-strength strike would have been devastating. Against Qingji, it barely drew blood, only a few superficial scratches. Her defense was disarmingly simple, yet astonishingly effective. She cloaked herself in armament haki far stronger than his own. The shockwave never fully connected. Her haki absorbed most of the impact, and her elemental reinforcement neutralized the rest. Nethin's mighty blow fizzled into a mere tap. Suddenly, the air crackled with icy shards. Qingji's crystalline construct, Lafitte's ice sculpture, creaked and groaned, then shattered inward. Even so, Nethin had infused his skin with his own armament haki, preventing himself from freezing solid in an instant. When the last shards fell away, he staggered free, every limb stiff and numb. His skin had taken on a deep blue hue, and throbbing frostbite streaked across his body. He was alive, but only just. Nethin watched in disbelief as the Navy Admiral cut through the Ghost Hand pirates like a scythe. In seconds, the Moonlight Moria crew was utterly shattered, no chance to even raise a defense. Lafitte forced a crooked grin as he staggered back toward his captain. "Looks like I drew the short straw today," he muttered. The Admiral's calm voice sliced through the chaos. "You go first, and if you can, take as many of them down with you." Nethin exhaled slowly. If only his armament haki were stronger, he might have been able to withstand some of Aokiji's freezing attack and fight alongside Lafitte. Robin, too, would have been far less vulnerable if her haki had held. She wouldn't have been encased in ice so swiftly. Thankfully, the frost only clung to her outer layer. She wasn't a full ice sculpture like Lafitte, though she was still utterly trapped. Somewhere in the melee, Luffy's voice rang out. "Don't count us out. Devil fruit powers can survive a lot more than this." Nethin clung to that sliver of hope. If Luffy was right, there might still be a way through the Admiral's onslaught. One last chance to turn the tide. Shilu studied the frozen specters encased in towering ice sculptures and felt no need to guess the outcome. Total annihilation. With their ghostly forces immobilized, neither Lafitte, Robin, nor Luo could possibly join him to oppose Qingji. At best, Shilu could stall the enemy long enough for his allies to slip away. "Understood, Captain," Lafitte said, swallowing back his grin. In an instant, his entire demeanor shifted. He became eerily imposing, as if half phased between this world and the next. With a ghostly flicker, he darted across the battlefield, scooping up Robin and Luo and whisking them to safety. Qingji let out a breath that felt colder than the ice underfoot, his face a mask of contempt. "Like I said," he murmured, voice low and cutting, "it'd be better for pests like you to die right here." Before the last word left his lips, Qingji blurred into an afterimage and sprang at Lafitte with blinding speed. Almost simultaneously, Nethin leaped forward himself. Though he couldn't match Qingji's raw velocity, his timing was impossibly precise, an uncanny anticipation of his foe's movements. Qingji's eyes flickered in surprise. Nethin shouldn't have been able to react so perfectly. Something about him had changed. Crack! Qingji's punch slammed into Nethin's side, driving the young man sprawling. Qingji followed with a brutal backhand. On impact, his fist crystallized into shards of ice that scattered like deadly rain. Qingji skidded to a halt the moment Lafitte vanished from sight. His staff crackled with frost, ready to strike again, when the very ground betrayed him. In an instant, the rocky earth shivered, rippling up like a living blanket to coil around his ankles and chest. Roots of ice and stone tightened, yanking him off balance and pinning him face down. He thrashed, breath clouding in the icy air, but the earth refused to relent. For all his power, Qingji realized too late that he'd underestimated his opponent's ingenuity. Through the blur of magic and soil, any trace of Lafitte's presence had been wiped clean. He tried to recapture that distant aura, but the further it lay from him, the fainter it grew, until it faded into absolute silence. When he finally pried himself free, Qingji's gaze snapped toward the only other person still standing, Nethin. The young swordsman's shoulders were steady, he didn't even seem winded. Behind him, a narrow canyon led downward. Lafitte, Robin, and Luo Xian had slipped away in that direction, their figures already swallowed by the rocks. "You let them escape," Qingji growled, voice low and dangerous. "You're awfully calm for someone who just cost me my prey." Nithin's grip tightened on his blade. Every scar on its steel had been paid for in blood, his and others. "I don't let anyone fall," he answered. If Nithin had chosen differently, if he'd allowed Lafitte and the others to flee unchallenged, Qingji could have shattered their defenses in seconds, then pursued them along the mountain trail with no one left to stop him. But twice already, Nithin stood in his way, first at the frozen river, then atop the ridge of shattered granite. Each time, Qingji had bled his magic fruitlessly, forced to claw his way clear. Now, drained and furious, Qingji knew he had a choice: chase after Lafitte at a fraction of his former strength, or deal with Nithin here and now before turning back. He clenched his jaw, frost forming on his eyelashes. "Very well," he said, voice as cold as the earth that had trapped him. "Then I'll make you watch as I break every bone in your friends' bodies, right before I shatter yours." Nithin's eyes narrowed. He raised his sword in a silent challenge. The wind howled through the canyon, carrying with it the promise of an even fiercer battle to come. Under the current circumstances, if Nithin diverted his attention to hunting Lafayette, killing Lafayette and his team, he might never find the roads. Destroying the roads had to remain his top priority. Qingji's reminder went unanswered. Nithin's eyes were as still as a mountain lake, his whole being enveloped in a profound calm. He'd activated Spiritual Mind, a secondary talent on the agility enhancement branch of the general system, much like the toughness talent. Its power, a dramatic surge in concentration. In this state of absolute focus, Nethin's vision and hearing stretched to their very limits, and his reaction time sharpened to a razor's edge. His raw speed still trailed Qingji's, but with reflexes honed to perfection and steely resolve, he'd already parried Qingji's last two assaults without difficulty. To reach this level, Nethin had invested all 50 of his talent proficiency points, 30 points into Twisted Fruit and 20 into agility enhancement. Now, nothing could shake his concentration, not even the threat of Lafayette's forces. Nithin realized there was no longer any way to further improve his physique. His only hope now lay in pushing his speed and strength to their absolute limits. Even if his body threatened to break under the strain, he needed that reckless edge, that slim chance of survival. This, he understood with grim clarity, was the greatest crisis he had faced since arriving in this world.